Hey guys. Tonight, we travel back to the ancient streets of Rome, where the marble's chipped, the sandals are sweaty, and the food is, honestly, kind of gross. Picture this. You're standing in a cramped insula, a rickety apartment above a noisy alley. As the smell of yesterday's fish sauce wafts in from somewhere suspiciously close to the sewer, your stomach grumbles. You glance over at the small clay plate in front of you, one sad piece of bread, a shriveled date, and a jug of diluted wine, so weak it's basically tangy water. Welcome to Roman dieting, where flavor goes to die, and body image still finds a way to haunt you. And, no, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from. And what time it is there. I always love seeing how far this sleepy little time machine travels. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The day starts early, and you're already behind. You haven't eaten since late yesterday afternoon. Because Romans, especially the image-conscious ones, often ate only 2 meals a day, if that. Breakfast? That's a laugh. They call it intaculum, and it usually consists of dry bread and maybe some cheese, if you're lucky. Maybe you chew slowly to savor it, but mostly you chew to avoid hearing your own stomach growl. It's not just about hunger, it's about class. You're no senator or emperor. You're somewhere in between. But even the elites, in their sprawling villas, have their dietary quirks. They obsess over what they eat, when they eat it, and who they're seen eating it with. Food, oddly enough, is both status symbol and shame trigger. You remember how much you used to like fresh bread. But now, you chew with guilt? Bread is peasant food, soft, unadorned, and suspiciously filling. The real aristocrats? They prefer complicated dishes, like dormice, stuffed with nuts and herbs. That's right. Imagine a hamster casserole. But you're stuck with barley loaves, and maybe a few olives if the market's kind. Your mind drifts to the forums where philosophers gather. Even those guys can't agree on what makes a virtuous diet. Historians still argue whether Roman austerity was moral conviction or just a weird flex. Either way, hunger always follows you. It's like an annoying ghost with grumbly intestines. Mid-morning, you're lightheaded, walking along the cracked stones of the Via Appia. Your tunic is scratchy, and the sun's already baking your scalp. You think of Apicius, the ancient Roman foodie, whose recipes are still floating around on crumbling parchment. He championed flavors like garuma fermented fish sauce, so pungent it could clear a temple. You're not sure if he was a genius or a culinary terrorist. Probably both. Your neighbor raves about his new diet. I only eat honey, soaked pine nuts, and boiled cabbage now. He brags. It's how Cato kept his bowels clean. You nod politely, wondering if his breath smells like compost. It probably does. But you can't escape the pressure. Everyone's obsessed with appearance. And not in a modern filtered selfie way. No. It's more brutal. Muscles are prized, not gym-toned, but lean from labor or calculated starvation. Fat, that's a political statement. Either you're indulgent and corrupt, or rich enough to flaunt your gluttony. There's no winning. You pass a bakery and catch a whiff of fresh panis. Your mouth waters instinctively, but you keep walking. Bread is for the weaker, so they say. Someone might see you. Someone important. And if there's anything Romans love more than conquest, it's judging each other's diets. That night, you finally eat something more substantial, cena. The main meal. But don't get excited. It's no feast. Maybe a plate of lentils, a handful of dates, and some stale wine. Your friend mentions a new scroll going around, some quack claiming figs cure melancholy, and too many leeks turn men into cowards. You laugh. But also, you quietly vow to avoid leaks as you lie on your stone-hard mattress. Stomach half full and dreams buzzing with roasted dormice. You start to see the bigger picture. Roman dieting wasn't about health, it was about hierarchy. Food wasn't nourishment, it was messaging. Everything you chewed, sipped, or skipped told the world who you were trying to be. Tomorrow, maybe you'll try skipping entaculum. You hear, that's what the Stoics do. And they're supposed to be really chill. You're not sure if that's true. But hey, anything to stop thinking about mice on skewers. You wake up to the sound of footsteps echoing up the stairwell. A neighbor's sandals slapping the stone in that unmistakable rhythm of early Roman guilt. Dawn is barely cracking open the sky. And already the day is full of judgment. You stretch, stiff and sore from sleeping on a mattress filled with straw and regret. And immediately you feel it, that hollow space in your belly. It's not hunger exactly. It's more like absence. The kind of emptiness that says, you skipped dinner again. Champ. Well done. But before you even think of food, there's a whole other routine to survive. First, the latrine. You shuffle outside. Tunic rumpled, blinking into the brightening air. Public toilets are shared. Of course. A long bench with holes. Communal sponges on sticks, dunked in vinegar water. And zero privacy. It's social. In a horrific kind of way. While relieving yourself, someone might comment on your pale complexion or suggest you try eating more pomegranates to soften the humors. You're not sure if that's medical advice or a roast. Now comes the cleansing. The Romans are hygiene obsessed. But their version of cleanliness often involves scraping oil off your skin with a curved metal tool called a strigil. You haven't bathed yet today, but you're already planning your trip to the public baths later. Hot, warm, cold plunge. Maybe some light gossip in the tepidarium. And if you're feeling really wild, a nice dry vomit in the apoditerium before supper. Kidding. Sort of. You glance at your cupboard. There's still a bit of barley cake left. Technically. This is entaculum. But you hesitate. There's a new trend sweeping the city. And even your neighbor's house slave is bragging about it. Fasting. Supposedly great for mental clarity and bowel regularity. You've never met a truly cheerful faster. But who are you to ignore the wisdom of the elite? You sip a weak infusion of chicory root, pretending it's energizing you. It's not. But you play along. Roman diets aren't about results, they're about ritual, disciplina, and a sprinkle of masochism. You remember hearing about Scipio Africanus, the famous general. They say he skipped breakfast before battles to stay sharp. Historians still argue whether that was real strategy or just a dramatic way to get out of meal prep. Now it's mid-morning, and your stomach is loudly questioning your life choices. But the cultural messaging is strong. To indulge is to slide into corruption. The republic may be gone, but its ghost still nags you with whispers of moral decay. You think about that stern bust of Cato the Elder staring down from the forum wall. He probably would have scolded you for even thinking about raisins before noon. Still, there are exceptions. Gladiators. For instance, you pass a group of them training in the dust and heat, broad-shouldered, scarred, sweating. You'd assume they ate like bulls. But in fact, their diets were mostly grains and legumes. They were even nicknamed Barley men. No rich meats or creamy sauces. Just fuel to keep swinging. You start to wonder if maybe they were onto something. Or maybe everyone was just poor. Probably both. Meanwhile, in wealthier parts of the city, elite women are engaging in their own food rituals. Some take daily doses of vinegar and crushed coral powder to stay thin. Others sip herbal teas meant to reduce swelling, which is code for any body part society has decided should be invisible this season. One recipe involves crushed rose petals, honey, and powdered deer antler. You don't know if it works, but it smells aggressively romantic. You bump into a market vendor selling dried figs and spiced wine. Your eyes linger a little too long on the figs. Looking to strengthen your kidneys, the vendor asks. Winking. You buy one just to make him stop talking. As you chew, a child runs past you, holding a small clay doll and yelling about bean soup. You envy his priorities. Later, you duck into a friend's domus for a quick visit. He's just returned from a private symposium, gathering of educated, mostly overfed men who drink watered wine and discuss the nature of the cosmos while reclining on couches. You ask what they served. He shrugs. Mussels, pickled radishes, maybe a little herbed lark tongue. I didn't eat much. Of course not. Because restraint is fashionable now. At least until someone starts waving a tray of cheese fritters. Evening arrives and your stomach, long past patience, is now planning its rebellion. Dinner will be light again, perhaps boiled lentils, with a splash of olive oil, if the gods are feeling generous. You sit down cross-legged, breathing through the smell of your neighbor's garum frying next door. It's everywhere. That sauce, fish guts left to rot in the sun, fermented into an umami nightmare. It's poured on everything from meat to fruit. Yes, Eva Fruit. Historians still argue whether anyone actually liked it or just used it to prove they were cultured. And, as you scrape your bowl clean, you wonder if food is this unappealing. Why are you still obsessing over it? But that's the Roman contradiction. The diet isn't meant to satisfy. It's meant to discipline, define, divide. Every bite or lack thereof is a moral posture. You fall asleep slightly hungry again. Your belly curled in on itself like a fist. But hey, tomorrow is another chance to skip breakfast and feel righteous about it. You wake again with the sun casting golden blades through the wooden shutters. And something strange is happening. You're dreaming of recipes, not feasts. Mind you, but dusty scrolls of instructions so complicated and weird, you start to sweat. And that's when you realize you're in Apicius's kitchen. Well, not literally. But your feet take you toward the home of a wealthy Roman who claims to follow Apicius, the ancient chef whose name became synonymous with extravagance. He wasn't just a cook. He was the culinary brand. Imagine if Gordon Ramsay, Martha Stewart, and a mad scientist merged into one and decided salt was too basic. That's Apicius. You blink at the long marble counter, lined with ingredients: pepper, cumin, coriander, mint, and a jug labeled liquamen, which you hope is just fish sauce and not something worse. Tonight, you're helping prepare a dinner party. And what a menu! The first course? Oysters, sea urchins, and so udder, boiled in brine. That's right. Apicius believed delicacies began with the weirdest body parts. And because Romans adored layers of flavor, everything gets mixed: sweet with salty, crunchy with soft, wine with everything. Even dessert feature black pepper, because nothing screams dessert like a spicy honey fritter. You try your best to assist, but the cook is scowling. He's stirring a pot of flamingo tongue stew and muttering something about texture. Apparently, tongue gets chewy if overcooked. You don't ask how he figured that out. As the kitchen fills with clashing aroma smoke, cinnamon, fermented anchovy, you start to appreciate how bizarre this whole culture of cuisine really is. On one hand, Romans are terrified of gluttony. On the other, they throw lavish banquets with ingredients imported from 3 continents. Historians still argue whether Apicius's recipes were ever actually cooked by average households or simply culinary fan fiction for the elite. Of course, you won't be eating any of this. You're staff tonight, not guest. You chew on a dried fig in the corner while watching the final course get plated, a pastry shaped like a pig. But inside live birds. It's called cochlearium. And when the crust is cracked, they fly out. Surprise, a dinner and a panic attack. You can't help but notice that most guests only nibble, not because they're full, because restraint looks good in front of others. These are power diner senators, patrons, elite widow sand. The real meal is gossip. Someone mentions that a rival has taken to drinking nothing but goat milk and lemon balm to cleanse his bile. Another boasts she fasted for 3 days after a bad dream. It's the Roman version of a juice cleanse, just with fewer fruits and more internalized judgment. Back in the kitchen, the cook slices a stuffed dormouse and offers you a bite. You hesitate. It's a mouse. But he insists. So you chew it slowly. And it's not bad. Nutty. Herby. Slightly terrifying. You nod, unsure if you're becoming sophisticated or just numb. Later, while scrubbing pans with ash and vinegar, you overhear someone mention Apicius's tragic end. He supposedly killed himself after realizing he could only afford one last feast. Not a metaphor. He had 10 million sesterces, left barely enough for a comfortable retirement, and decided life without luxury wasn't worth living. Historians still argue whether this tale was true or just a moralistic dig at indulgence. Either way, it's peak Roman drama. You walk home in the dark, the stars crisp above, and your stomach still uncertain whether it's satisfied or simply confused. You pass a couple of late-night vendors packing up-spiced nuts, boiled peas, grilled livers on skewers. Street food has its charm, but none of it would make Apicius blink. As you reach your door, you remember something odd from earlier. A jar on the kitchen shelf, labeled Theriaca. It's a mix of over 60 ingredients, meant to be an antidote to everything, from indigestion to snake bites. One version includes opium, cinnamon, and bits of crushed viper. You wonder how many diners accidentally cured their dinner while eating it. Sliding into bed, your dreams return. But this time, it's not recipes, it's flamingos, judging you for eating their tongues. You sigh, just another night under Roman stars, where dinner is performance art, hunger is political, and you still haven't figured out what that jellyfish jelly was meant to go with. You wake to the rustle of silk and the sound of servants arguing over whether peas are spiritually corrupting. It's one of those mornings where you realize you've been invited somewhere fancy, and that means one thing. You need to look semi-respectable while silently enduring the latest dietary experiment of a man with too much power and not enough actual hobbies. You arrive at the domus of Emperor Caligula, or at least his inner circle, where the marble floors are so polished, you keep sliding a little with each step. You're not even entirely sure why you're invited. Maybe someone confused you with someone else, but you're not about to question a Roman emperor's whims. Especially not this one. The moment you walk in, someone grabs your cloak and mutters, "Peas are forbidden today." He's doing greenless again. Oh? You try to nod. Like that. Makes sense. Greenless? You whisper to the person next to you. He says green foods disturb the liver's aura. They reply with a straight face. Yesterday, it was white foods. Only beige. Bread and boiled chicken. Caligula himself is in the triclinium, reclining dramatically. He's glowing with that kind of manic energy that says he definitely skipped carbs this week. You sit quietly, pretending not to breathe too loud as the servers bring out the first course, parrot eggs poached in honey. You pick at yours, trying to hide the fact that you're not even slightly hungry, just deeply confused. The emperor suddenly declares that fruits are deceitful. They look plump, but they offer no real sustenance, he proclaims. As though this is a shocking revelation. Grapes are lying jewels. You nod gravely. Everyone does. This is a man who appointed his horse to a political office. You're not correcting him over grapes. Today's meal is part of what you've come to recognize as Roman fad diet theater. Caligula's court isn't alone. Nobles all over the empire are locked in a never-ending battle to one-up each other with the weirdest, most restrictive food rules. 1 week, it's raw only, because cooking is violent to nature. The next, it's animal-free, which is hilarious when you remember they still drink milk and wear leather. Historians still argue whether Caligula's dietary obsessions were part of his growing madness or just elaborate power plays to keep people off balance. Either way, you spend most of the meal sneaking glances at the dishes and wondering what poor creature became today's centerpiece. Oh, there it is. A peacock. Grilled. Defeathered. Refeathered for presentation. And surrounded by pomegranate seeds. It looks impressive. Until you try a bite. It's dry. Really dry. Like, was this cooked last week? Dry? Dessert is something called libum, a cheese-based cake offered to the gods, but now apparently deemed fit for you. 2. It's okay. A bit spongy. You sneak a second bite before realizing someone nearby is counting how many mouthfuls everyone takes. It's a form of subtle competition who can be the most indifferent to pleasure while still sitting through a 12-course ordeal. After the meal, you're ushered into the garden, where a philosopher is giving a brief talk on how fennel is the key to spiritual harmony. You sip wine, so watered down, it might actually be just fancy rain. And watch, as a nobleman boasts about surviving on nothing but lentil paste and goat's milk during his last retreat in the Sabine Hills. My humors have never been so balanced, he says, which is possibly the least appetizing sentence you've ever heard. Someone nearby whispers that Tiberius once ate only cucumbers for a month. Not grave, though they were steeped in vinegar and honey, then sun-dried and soaked again. Cleanses the bile, they say. You raise an eyebrow. A lot of things cleanse bile. You think? Like arsenic. Or, listening to this conversation, by evening, you're lightheaded not from fasting, but from the sheer performance of it all. The whole day has been a parade of ingredients no one likes, eaten for the sake of appearing enlightened. You remember reading somewhere that Roman doctors recommended boiled cabbage before drinking wine to prevent drunkenness. Someone else suggested a diet of onions and wild herbs to purify the blood. You wonder what would happen if anyone just ate because they were hungry. Probably exile. As you shuffle out, a servant presses something into your hand, a fig, wrapped in mint leaf. You eat it on the walk home, slowly, savoring it in the dimming light. It's the first thing all day that tastes like actual food. You pause by a public fountain, splashing water on your face, and realize how deeply exhausting it is to perform discipline every day. Roman dieting isn't about the body, it's about theater. Who can resist the longest? Suffer the prettiest? Fast the most publicly? Even emperors aren't immune, especially not emperors. When you finally collapse on your mattress, your mind is spinning with images of peacocks, parrot eggs, and greenless diets. You wonder what tomorrow's food rule will be. No round things, no shadows, only food touched by moonlight. You groan into your pillow. This empire has conquered half the world, but nobody knows how to eat lunch without making it weird. You're sore before you even open your eyes. Limbs, aching from the cold stone floor you passed out on after another night of stomach-rumbling restraint. But today, your stomach isn't your first concern. No? Today, you've agreed. Why did you agree? To join your friend for a wellness day at the Roman Thermae, which is basically the ancient version of a gym. Spa, sauna, therapist's office, and political networking event rolled into one gloriously sweaty public complex. You arrive before the baths really get going, hoping to beat the crowd. But too late, the place is already humming. The air is heavy with steam and ambition. Cloaks come off. Tunics are tossed into cubbies. And your self-esteem plummets faster than a gladiator with a pulled hamstring. Roman men, despite the lean diets, are not shy about showing off. In fact, most seem to think it's a moral duty to look oiled and glistening by 9 a.m. There's a definite performative element to all of this. You make your way into the palaestra, where people are doing exercises with heavy stones, swinging wooden swords, and jogging in circles that look more punishing than productive. Someone offers you a shot of vinegar water pasca, the drink of soldiers and sweaty overachievers. It tastes like sour regret. Still, till you drink it, hydration is key, especially when you're about to sweat out your body weight in the name of Roman virtue. The goal here isn't just fitness. It's self-discipline, status, and a pinch of self-inflicted suffering. One older senator is doing laps around the courtyard in full armor for resistance. Another has wrapped his thighs in wool and keeps muttering about how cold triggers fat loss. Historians still argue whether these techniques were based on early theories of metabolism or just sheer masochism. You try a light stretch, immediately pull something in your back, and decide instead to sit on a bench and people watch. Someone nearby is explaining his pre-bath diet: 2 raw eggs, a crushed walnut drink, and half a radish. Galen recommends radishes to stimulate the spleen. He explains proudly, flexing a little too hard for a guy who smells like goat milk. Eventually, you're herded into the caldarium, the hot room, where steam pours in and bodies glisten like roasting olives. You can barely breathe. A slave scrapes your arms with a strigil, removing dead skin, dirt, and what little dignity you had left. You think back to earlier, when you considered skipping the baths. You should have skipped the baths. From there, it's into the tepidarium warm, fragrant, blissfully less steamy. You collapse onto a heated marble slab and try not to pass out. The guy next to you is talking about emetics. I take one after dinner. Clears the system. Leaves room for thought. He says this like it's a normal bedtime routine. Like brushing your teeth. Except brushing doesn't involve gagging into a bronze bowl while your dinner guests politely look away. You think back to that dinner you barely survived last week, where someone vanished between courses only to return, looking suspiciously fresher. The emetic culture isn't exactly a myth, though historians still argue whether it was widespread or just something elite weirdos did between rounds of oyster custard and ego inflation. By the time you hit the frigidarium, the cold plunge you're half delirious. You dunk anyway. The shock wakes you up, tightens every muscle in your body, and resets your mood to something just above, "Please end me." You emerge gasping, refreshed and vaguely bitter. Afterward, lounging in the sun-baked courtyard, you nibble a fig stuffed with pine nuts and wrapped in grape leaf. It's supposed to help digestion. Or was it boost libido? Or ward off demons? You can't keep track. A fellow bather says he only eats after his post-bath oiling. And even then, only lightly. No more than a handful. Cato's rule. Everyone loves to quote Cato the Elder. The grumpiest nutrition influencer in Roman memory, he claimed cabbage cured everything from indigestion to moral decay. He also thought Greeks were soft. So take his views with a pinch of salted anchovy paste. Still, there's something fascinating about how dedicated everyone is to these routines. Romans treat their bodies like sacred battlegrounds. Each food, scrub, and stretch a declaration of allegiance to discipline over indulgence. And yet, the lines blur. Just yesterday, someone told you that Emperor Nero had once gone on an all-leek diet for voice clarity before a lyre performance. The same Nero who burned cities and composed love poems to himself. Balanced. As you make your way home, your legs weak from overexertion, and your stomach tighter than your tunic. You wonder what all of it amounts to. Do they feel better, or just superior? Because despite the sweat and the oil, despite the vomiting and vinegar, no one seems genuinely content. You chew on a date and imagine starting your own food movement. Something wild. Maybe eating when you're hungry. A radical concept. Back in your room, the scent of mint oil still clinging to your skin, you collapse onto your mattress. Every muscle hums. Not from progress, but from pressure. The Roman wellness grind doesn't rest. You'd better sleep while you can tomorrow. Someone might declare water emotionally toxic and insist on hydrating with tears of Sicilian oranges. You wake to the sharp clatter of hooves in the alley and the low groan of your own stomach again. It's becoming a daily routine. This quiet war with hunger. But today, you're leaving your dusty apartment for something different. You've agreed to tag along with your friend, a merchant's son, on a short trip out of the city to his family's villa. It's meant to be a retreat, a breath of fresh countryside air, maybe even a proper meal. The road out of town smells like wet stone and donkey sweat. But the moment the city fades behind you, something shifts. Fewer smells. More trees. Olive groves shimmer in the distance. And you feel, for the first time in a while, the faint tickle of hope that you might eat something not soaked in vinegar or fermented beyond recognition. When you arrive at the villa, everything is sun-warmed and silent. The staff is already preparing lunch in the outdoor kitchen. You catch sight of a roasting spit, turning slowly over a fire pities. Actual meat and what looks like figs being split and stuffed with goat cheese. Your heart flutters. Could it be? A real, indulgent, non-eating Roman lunch? Not exactly. You're offered a place at the servants' table. Your friend wealthy, perfectly groomed. Always a little smug sits with his family beneath a shaded pergola. Their table is elegant. Peacock feathers for decoration. Pitchers of chilled wine. A tray of exotic fruit imported from the East. Meanwhile, you're led around back to a wooden bench beneath a fig tree. Here, the meal is more practical. Your plate holds a scoop of pulse, a thick porridge made of barley or farro. It's lumpy, grayish, and exactly as inspiring as it sounds. Next to it, a few olives, a slab of coarse brown bread, and a raw onion. That's it. Not cheese, no meat, and certainly no figs stuffed with anything. The contrast is staggering. You glance around at the other field workers. Cooks. Laundry. Women all chewing dutifully. No one complains. Hunger has trained them to be polite. Still, it's hard to ignore the laughter drifting from the main table. Or the way your friend casually discards the crust of his honey-glazed pastry. You've just taken your second bite of barley when an older servant leans in and says, "Used to be we got garum with our porridge. Not anymore. Times are thin." He shrugs. You nod. Times are always thin for people like him. And, by extension, for you, the divide between Roman classes isn't just visible in clothes or homesits on every plate. Patricians dine in rituals, layering flavors and textures, debating the origin of each ingredient. Slaves and freedmen, they eat what fills them. Grain, legumes, dried fruit, occasionally salted fish, if someone's generous. If you're lucky, maybe cheese made from sheep's milk, or a stew thickened with turnips and bones. If not, more barley mush. Historians still argue whether this disparity caused real unrest or was so normalized that no one bothered to protest. After all, food was never meant to be. Ferret was a mirror of your place in the pecking order. Quite literally. You remember the story of Emperor Elagabalus. He once served guests a banquet where the nobles got delicacies, and the less noble attendees were served rocks and sawdust. Just for the joke. At the time, everyone laughed nervously. You bet no one actually swallowed the rocks. Back at the villa, you've finished your lunch and are helping clean up. The other workers talk about dinner stew tonight. Maybe with lentils. If the master's feeling merciful, he fasts on even-numbered days now. Someone says, thinks it pleases the gods. Means less scraps for us. You try to remember the last time you ate without wondering whether it was symbolic, whether it was being watched. Even this gruel, even now, feels like someone's test. Later, you sneak a glimpse of the leftovers from the main table. The family hasn't finished half of it. Quail legs, honeyed dates, roasted figs, a whole eel still sizzling on a bronze platter. You consider grabbing something before it's tossed. But a sharp-eyed steward glares your way. You retreat. That evening, as the sun melts behind cypress trees, you sit with the workers and share a small dish of boiled chickpeas. The fire crackles. The barley has settled uneasily in your stomach, but there's a strange calm. 2. The honest exhaustion of labor. The rhythm of spoon-scraping bowl. The quiet acceptance that this is dinner. Someone tells a joke about a philosopher who gave up figs to prove his detachment from worldly pleasure, only to die of constipation. You laugh harder than the joke deserves. Maybe because you're a little terrified of how true it feels. Before bed, you step out into the garden. The smell of rosemary and smoke hangs in the air. Somewhere inside the villa, your friend is sipping mulled wine and discussing politics. You're staring at an olive tree, wondering if stealing just one would count as a sin, a snack, or a survival tactic. Your stomach grumbles. You smile faintly. In Rome, appetite is rebellion, even when all you're craving is another bite of mush. You wake before the roosters, yes. Even the obnoxious one, near the fig tree, and your mouth as dry as clay. It's the kind of morning where your dreams were full of honey cakes. But all you've got is a vague whiff of smoke from the kitchen and an ominous ache in your belly. You rise slowly, brush the dust from your tunic, and head toward the cooking area, hoping for anything not made from barley or onions. But today, the villa's kitchen staff is excited. A shipment has come in from the coast. Imported amphorae, still wet with sea salt, sealed with wax and mystery. Inside, garum. If you've never encountered garum before, well, imagine if soy sauce and fish oil had a love child, then left it in the sun for a week to think about its choices. The smell alone could knock a centurion off his horse. But in ancient Rome, garum is gold, a culinary must-have, a condiment that transcends class and logic. You watch as the amphorae are cracked open. The thick, briny liquid sloshes out, viscous and brown, like some ancient beast awakening. Everyone rushes to gather a sample, even the cook, who usually sneers at everything. Looks giddy. He says. The good stuff, from Baetica. You try a taste. Instantly, your mouth is assaulted by salt, rot, tang, and something you can't quite name. You cough politely. Someone pats your back. Takes getting used to. They say, but it covers everything: burnt bread, bad fish, even poor decisions. Oh. And they're right. Romance pour garum on everything. Lentils needs garum. Boiled vegetables, garum. Fruit? Why not? It's not just a flavor, it's an identity. They have garum from mackerel, from anchovies, even from tuna offal. There are cheap versions sold to the lower classes and luxury brands, aged in special clay and sealed with the maker's stamp. Like a bottle of overpriced balsamic vinegar you might find today. Historians still argue whether everyone genuinely liked the taste or simply tolerated it because they had no better options. But one thing's certain: if your food is bland, garum will fix it, or at least distract your taste buds until they give up entirely. You help prepare the mid-morning meal: cabbage stew, wilted herbs, some stale bread. The cook ladles garum into the pot like it's the essence of life itself. And suddenly, the air is thick with that deep, ocean-fermented funk. The stew goes from boring to, "Please open a window," in 10 seconds flat. Later, during a short break in the olive grove, you overhear a debate between two older workers. One swears that garum cures sore throats. The other claims it once dissolved a tooth. You're not sure who's right. But honestly, both sound plausible. You think back to how even emperors used it. Pliny the Elder called it a luxurious delicacy. The recipe for premium garum? Layered fish entrails and salt, left to ferment in the sun for months, stirred occasionally, and strained through baskets woven with palm fronds. It's not so much cooked as allowed to happen. Nature's weird gift to human taste buds. There's even a story, likely apocryphal, that a garum factory once exploded in Pompeii, flooding the street with fermented sludge. The stench lingered for days. No one could enter the district. You imagine being trapped under a collapsed roof, waiting for rescue, and your final memory being the overwhelming aroma of ancient fish guts. Delightful. Dinner that night is a bit more festive. Someone's birthday, which means a small feast. There's chickpea paste, turnips baked in ashes, and, yes, a dish of garum-drenched eggs. You eat slowly, thoughtfully. The eggs are confusing, creamy. Yes, but the sauce makes them taste like a beach after a storm. You don't complain. What fascinates you most is how garum has become Rome's great culinary equalizer. Rich or poor, free or enslaved, urban or rural, everyone consumes it. It masks the taste of decay, stretches the flavor of meager ingredients, and creates an illusion of opulence. You can eat dry bread, but dip it in garum, and suddenly it's cena-worthy. You return to your room late, stomach full, mouth still tingling with salt and smoke. The stars are bright above, and the fig tree rustles gently in the wind. You lie down, the scent of garum clinging to your tunic, and wonder what future generations will think of this era. The Colosseum, the aqueducts, and the sauce made from rotting fish intestines. Will they admire the innovation or gag at the recipe? Historians still argue whether garum was more medicinal than culinary. A survival tool more than a delicacy. But to you, lying in a small, clay-walled room with a full belly, it's something else entirely. It's proof that even in a world of suffering, conquest, and terrible dietary advice, people still find ways to make their food taste like something. Even if that something is fermented fish guts from Baetica, you wake to shouting in the courtyard. Not the normal arguments over who stole, whose tunic, or why the chickens keep getting into the laundry. This is louder, angrier, and definitely about bread. You blink, stretch, and shuffle toward the noise. Turns out, the grain delivery's late again, and the baker's apprentice is trying to calm a small mob of very hungry, very opinionated Romans. The crowd's not just annoyed, they're on the edge of riot. And in Rome, that's not unusual. If there's one thing guaranteed to make people lose their sandals, it's messing with the grain supply. Food isn't just nourishment, it's politics. Every loaf of bread carries centuries of baggage. You sneak closer, ears perked. Turns out, the delay is due to bad weather along the Egyptian coast. Ships haven't arrived. That's a problem, because Rome imports tons of grain literally from Egypt and North Africa. Without it, bakers can't bake, and stomachs start grumbling in unison. A few more days of this and someone's going to get trampled in a flour line. As the crowd disperses with muttered threats and exaggerated sighs, you make your way to the bakery. Inside, the air is warm and yeasty. Loaves cool on a wooden rack, thick, crusty, and grayish-brown. This is panis plebeius, the bread of the commoner, made from coarse grain and chaff. You bite into a slice. It's dense, heavy, and filled with little hard bits, sometimes sand, sometimes rock, depending on the mill. But here's the kicker. Even this humble loaf has social meaning. The poor eat brown bread. The rich eat white, not the soft, fluffy kind you might imagine, but fine-milled wheat loaves that almost sparkle in comparison to your rock bread. That color difference? It's everything. Pale bread equals status. Brown bread equals labor. You've heard rumors that some lower-class families scrape the outer layer off their loaves to make them look lighter, more refined. Others dye their bread using chalk or ash to mimic the elite loaves. It's food cosplay, basically, all to appear a little closer to the top. Historians still argue whether this obsession with bread color began under the Republic or took off with the Empire. But either way, it's stuck. Food isn't just sustenance, it's a symbol, a stale, crumbly, often sandy symbol. You wander the market later and overhear someone complaining that they were served panis furfuros branbridat, a public banquet. The horror. They spit the word like it's an insult. It probably is. Meanwhile, the baker from earlier is handing out samples of a new recipe, bread mixed with mashed beans to stretch the flour. Easier to digest, he says. You chew cautiously. Easier to digest. Sure, but also weirdly bitter. Not a trend you hope sticks. Back at home, your neighbor boasts about getting a loaf made from spelt, the grain of the ancients. He says, Cato himself ate it. You want to tell him Cato also believed cabbage cured hangovers and had no friends. But you hold your tongue. As the afternoon heats up, you remember another story how Emperor Augustus famously used the grain dole to keep the city calm. Free wheat for citizens, handed out monthly. It wasn't generosity, it was insurance against revolt. Keep the bread flowing. And maybe people won't burn down the forum. Maybe. Some scholars debate whether this was a brilliant move or a disaster in disguise. By turning food into politics, Augustus created dependency. Now, if the grain stops, the city trembles. You chew your crust and wonder how many revolutions have started with bad breakfast. You watch as children run by with bread crusts in hand, laughing and kicking a clay ball. Even they know the unspoken rule. Don't waste food. But don't show too much enthusiasm either. Bread is basic, necessary, invisible until it disappears. That night, you sit down for supper, just more bread and some olive oil. Maybe a few leftover lentils. You watch your neighbor carefully cut the dark edges off his loaf and push them aside like they're shameful. He chews only the softest. Barley. It's performative, but it works. Everyone nods approvingly. He's disciplined, refined, practically patrician. You're tempted to do the same, but instead you eat the crust. Slowly, deliberately. It's not delicious, but it's filling. And in this city, that's more than most can count on. You lie down later, belly quiet for once, and think about all the loaves left behind at today's baker, each one stamped with the baker's personal seal. Each one, a tiny edible manifesto. Bread isn't just about flavor. It's about class, control, and a constant reminder that your diet isn't always yours to choose. You dream of a place where bread is just bread, no politics. No symbolism. No hidden meanings. Just warm, soft, crusty bliss. You'll probably wake up to barley mush again. But for now, you let yourself believe in the fantasy of bread without baggage. You wake to the scent of something oddly floral and faintly bitter wafting through the open window. A few birds chirp in the olive trees. But your nose is leading the way today. Down the villa's garden path, past a few sleepy sheep and a suspiciously large pile of amphorae, you find the cook hunched over a steaming pot of herbs, flowers. It's hard to tell. Everything looks a bit green and wilted, except the steam, which rises in lazy curls like it's relaxing more than you are. Roti, the cook says, not looking up. For purification. Oh, you raise an eyebrow. Rue, as in the medicinal plant that smells like someone burned celery with a vengeance. Supposed to clear the liver, the blood, the mind, he mutters. And after last night's feast, everyone needs a little clearing. Oh. You glance around the garden. A few nobles lie draped across benches and low couches, groaning like hungover statues. One has a wreath crooked on his head. Another is half-heartedly chewing fennel stalks like a cow who's lost the will to live. This is what happens after a Roman detox weakened 1 part herbal tea, 3 parts wine, orgy, and the rest somewhere between philosophy and flatulence, because here in Barley, the famous resort town by the sea, health and hedonism live side by side in deeply confusing harmony. It's the Las Vegas of ancient Rome. People come here to relax, soak in mineral springs, and also completely destroy their livers while pretending they're healing them. You sip a little of the roux tea. It tastes like boiled guilt. Someone nearby mutters about trying a garlic and ox bile cleanse next. Another claims a priestess in Naples taught him to fast for clarity, but only after a light snack of figs and goat brain. You try not to laugh, but your stomach makes a noise of protest. It's confused. So, are you. This is what Roman detox culture looks like. Highly specific herbal concoctions. Mysterious rituals involving incense and goat fat. And sometimes, a spontaneous nap in a marble tub. It's not new. Even the ancients thought toxins were real, just not in the way modern people do. For them, everything was about balancing humors. Too much yellow bile? Avoid spicy food. Too much phlegm? Roux tea. Too much red wine and regret? Time for a bath and a beet salad? Historians still argue whether these detoxes were actually based on empirical results or just ritual theatrics with expensive ingredients. Probably both. Either way, you find yourself being pulled along by the day's schedule. Cold bath, fennel chewing, a walk through a rosemary maze. Yes, that's a thing. And finally, a group cleansing dinner. Oh, the menu is a thing of beauty and strangeness. Boiled leeks with honey, roasted celery root with vinegar, and a dish simply labeled soothing lentils, which sounds suspiciously like code for bland and beige. You sit with the others around a mosaic-tiled table, all of you wrapped in loose linens like extras, in a very low-budget toga drama. There's no meat, no fish, no garum, gasp, and absolutely no bread. The hosta, very proud man named Marcus, who owns a falcon and several imported carpets, declares this a purgative feast. Food should humble us, he intones, while sipping beet broth. You watch him swallow and wonder if his facial expression is enlightenment or mild nausea. As the meal progresses, people share dreams they've had, digestive updates, and which herbal compress made them sweat the most. Someone swears by olive oil enemas. Another insists on goat milk fasting during full moons. A woman named Flavia explains how she once spent 3 days eating only crushed poppy seeds and experienced a vision of Venus telling her to stop being dramatic. You nod along, chewing your lentils slowly. They taste like nothing. Not in a bad way, more like a spoonful of absence. Maybe that's the point. Roman dieting isn't about fullness. It's about elimination of toxins, of indulgence, of self-worth. If you're not careful, later, you sneak away to the bath complex and dip into the warm mineral water. It smells faintly of sulfur and something oddly sweet. You float for a while, weightless and dizzy from all the fennel. Your mind wanders. You think about how these wellness trends echo through time, humans, forever searching for the thing that will fix them, cleanse them, perfect them. It's never the food. It's the fantasy. Someone slides into the bath beside you and sighs deeply. I haven't eaten bread in 6 days, he whispers, like confessing to a crime. I feel virtuous and also faint. You nod. That tracks. As the sun dips low and the sky turns syrupy pink, the group gathers one last time for a ritual smoke of myrrh and a final herbal draft. You're not sure what's in it, but it tastes like licorice had a nervous breakdown. Everyone looks tired, skinny, vaguely smug. You curl up under a cypress tree and let the sounds of the sea lull you towards sleep. Your stomach growls. A tiny, pitiful reminder that even detoxing has its price. And in Rome, the price is always paid in flavor. You wake on a stone bench with a cypress branch stuck in your hair, and the distinct sensation that your body has started quietly revolting. Everything acts your limbs, your joints, your sense of dignity. Somewhere nearby, a lyre plinks softly, which might be soothing if your stomach weren't already trying to eat itself. But don't worry, you've got a plan. Today, you're going to visit Seneca. Or rather, you're going to spend the day pretending you live like him. Stoic philosopher, imperial advisor, and professional guilt tripper. Seneca wrote long letters about the value of simplicity, of embracing discomfort, of denying yourself every pleasure, short of air and the occasional raisin, which means you're in for a real treat. Your first meal of the day? A dried fig. Just one. You place it carefully on a small wooden plate and try to chew with reverence. The fig tastes fine, but mostly like a question. Shouldn't food be more than this? No, says Seneca. You should be grateful for that fig. It connects you to nature. Also, pain is useful. You try not to roll your eyes, because, technically, that's not very stoic of you. You spend the morning walking barefoot through the garden. As Seneca recommended, live like you have nothing. He once said, which is funny, because he definitely had something. In fact, historians still argue whether Seneca's extreme self-discipline was authentic or just good PR for someone who owned multiple villas and was possibly richer than the emperor himself. Your neighbor joins you on the walk. He's doing a stoic cleanse, too. Just water, figs, and philosophy. He says proudly, "It's day 4. I can see sounds." You nod. Not because you agree, but because you're starting to hear a faint ringing noise and assume it's hunger-induced. You pause beside a small fig tree. Its fruit still unripe. They say Cato only ate after sunset. Your neighbor murmurs, and he never tasted luxury. Cato again, the human embodiment of a dry cracker. You smile thinly and pretend you're impressed. At midday, you retire to a shaded room and try to read a scroll. But your eyes blur, and your stomach keeps sending passive-aggressive signals to your brain. You drink water plain, room temperature, served in a clay cup, and try to feel morally superior. You mostly just feel tired. The Stoics believed in mastering desire, in reducing life to its core essentials so that nothing could shake you. Comfort was a trap. Pleasure was fleeting. And fullness? Dangerous. You tell yourself this as you chew on an old piece of bread you found tucked under a linen napkin. Technically, it's a transgression, but you promise to meditate later to cancel it out. By afternoon, the hunger becomes almost meditative. Your body stops protesting and starts floating. You walk through the atrium, past marble busts and empty dishes, and imagine yourself above it all. Look at you, disciplined, detached, dreaming of turnips and not even reaching for them. You are a rock, a dried fig with a toga. Then someone mentions they've heard of a newer, stricter. Stoic practice involving voluntary sickness, eating slightly spoiled food to test the soul. You nod politely and step away quickly. There's commitment. And then there's bacteria. You think about Seneca himself, who once described his meals as so plain they could be served to a prisoner. He wrote about how the man who welcomes hunger trains his will. He also accepted Nero's money and lived in extreme comfort, which makes your current bout of barley-induced humility feel slightly ironic. Historians debate how sincere Seneca truly was. Did he really live the ascetic life? Or did he just write about it to appear virtuous while enjoying wine and figs by the amphora? Either way, people took him seriously. Stoic diets caught on. For a while, it became fashionable to pretend you didn't like food even when your pantry overflowed with dates and cheese and little honey cakes shaped like animals. That evening, you gather with a few like-minded masochists for a silent supper. It's literally just boiled lentils and water. No spices. No salt. Just texture. You chew slowly, in sync with your breath, and try to convince yourself this is spiritual. Someone across from you looks like they're crying, but it might just be lentil fatigue. Afterward, you sit under the stars with a scroll of Seneca's writings. One line sticks with you. It is not the man who has little, but the man who craves more, who is poor. You squint at it. Philosophically, sure, but nutritionally, your stomach strongly disagrees. Back in your room, you lie awake, listening to the quiet hum of the villa. The hunger is still there, but it's less sharp now. It's become a kind of companion annoying, persistent, slightly philosophical. You think of Seneca, lecturing about restraint from the comfort of his estate, and wonder if he ever secretly dunked his figs in honey when no one was watching. You smile in the dark. Tomorrow, maybe you'll try being Epicurean instead. They believed in moderation too, but their version included cheese. You wake to the sound of marching feet, steady, thunderous rhythm pounding against the hard-packed earth like the pulse of the empire itself. It's not a dream. You're on campaign now, traveling with the legions, far from the plush cushions and fig trees of polite Roman society. Here, in the gritty world of military life, dieting isn't about virtue or body image. It's about survival. The sun is barely cresting the hills as you strap on your sandals and reach for your day's provisions. No fresh bread, no olive oil, no garum in sight. What you get is a hard, jaw-breaking biscuit called buxalatum, made from flour, water, and spite. It's so dry, you could use it as a weapon. You chew slowly, each bite a battle between your teeth and the brick-like texture. Somehow, you win. Barely. Your water skin holds diluted vinegar pasca sour drink favored by soldiers. It cuts through the blandness, keeps the water cleanish, and burns slightly going down. You're not sure if that's the acidity or your body rejecting your breakfast. Either way, it wakes you up. The Roman military doesn't do luxury. Food is fuel, measured and portioned for maximum efficiency. Each soldier carries their own rationez grains, legumes, salt, sometimes dried meat if they're lucky. A portable hand mill grinds grain into flour for porridge or hard cakes. Fires are rare. Complaining is useless. You eat what you carry, and you carry what you eat. You march all morning, the sun climbing higher, your feet blistering in their sandals. Your stomach growls. Someone ahead tears open a pouch of dried figs and passes one back to you. It's sweet, heavy, and tastes like the countryside. You savor it like it's a banquet. By midday, the army halts for rest. You sit on a rock and prepare pulse. A grain mush with bits of bean and maybe a hint of herb. If you're fancy, you stir it with a stick and try not to think about what senators are eating right now. Probably peacock tongues glazed in cinnamon. You glance at your pulse and chuckle. Peacock mush doesn't have quite the same ring. A grizzled centurion plops down beside you. Better than starving, he says, nodding at your bowl. Worse than everything else. You nod in agreement. Food in the military isn't just basis, it's symbolic, stoic, even a test of endurance. There's no space for indulgence. You need lean, durable bodies, no softness. The diet trains you as much as the drills do. Historians still argue whether this was strategic or just a byproduct of supply limitations. Maybe it's both. But the effect is clear. Every bite of hard biscuit reinforces the Roman ideal of rugged discipline. Later, as you march through a narrow mountain pass, you remember hearing that Julius Caesar once ate only grass and tree bark during a siege. You assume that was poetic exaggeration until you spot a soldier gnawing on wild sorrel with genuine enthusiasm. For digestion, he explains. Mouth half full. And scurvy. You nod slowly. Right. That evening, you help set up camp. Tents rise. Fires spark. And a stew simmers in a dented pot. It smells vaguely edible. A mixture of lentils, barley, and dried pork fat. You gather around with the others, bowls in hand, and listen to stories of past campaign show in Gaul. They once ate roasted acorns. How in Germania, they fried moss in bear fat. You're not sure if any of it's true, but it fills the silence between bites. You sip your pasca. Still sour. Still awful. But oddly refreshing. Someone offers a slice of goat cheese. You nearly cry. It's creamy, salty, and tastes like a miracle. Don't get used to it. They warn. Tomorrow, it's roots again. As the stars appear, and the camp settles into quiet murmurs, and the occasional belch, you lie back on your pack and stare upward. The Roman diet out here isn't about beauty or cleansing. It's about pushing through, enduring hunger, weather, pain. It's not elegant, but it's powerful. You think of home of figs, of bread, of perfumed tea you once sipped while pretending to enjoy fennel vapors. That life feels impossibly far away. Here, you're stripped down to the basics. Grain, water, willpower. Tomorrow, you'll wake up sore, eat something dry and sad, and march until your legs forget how to stop. But tonight, under the cold stars, belly half full, you feel capable, like a cog in something massive and ancient and absurd. You drift to sleep with the faint taste of vinegar still on your tongue and the smell of lentils in your cloak. In Rome, food defines your role. And tonight, you're a soldier. You wake to the unmistakable sound of someone choking on a toothpick. Again. It's the third time this week. Apparently, the man thought he could casually clear a bit of date from his molar while also reciting a line of Virgil. He was wrong. A nearby physician pats him on the back with one hand while cradling a tray of fennel seeds in the other, muttering something about bad breath being a moral failing. Welcome to another Roman dinner party, where everything from your table posture to your parsley intake is under surveillance. The table is long, low, and lined with cushions, because proper Romans eat reclining on their left side. Specifically, you slide into position, trying not to elbow the guest beside you, who's already dabbing his face with a linen cloth scented with saffron. That's the level of commitment tonight. You're not just here to eat. You're here to perform digestive decency like it's an Olympic sport. Before the first course even arrives, you're handed a sprig of parsley. Chew it. Your host says, it freshens the breath and suppresses gas. You nod. Because what else are you going to dorgue with a man who once expelled a dinner guest for sneezing during an olive course? You chew. It's bitter, vaguely grassy. Your mouth tastes like a well-kept lawn. Then come the appetizers. Eggs with pine nuts, mussels in wine sauce, tiny artichokes soaked in oil. But here's the catch-of-ery. Single bite is dainty. You're expected to eat slowly, sparingly, and, most importantly, silently. No smacking, no slurping, and absolutely no burping. The rules of Roman dining etiquette are extensive, and they come with real consequences. You once watched a senator spend 20 minutes folding his napkin just to avoid eating a third grape. Moderation is theater, and your performance is being judged. You glance around and notice a servant discreetly holding out toothpicks, actual little sticks made of wood or bronze. Not just for dental hygiene, but also to help avoid the sin of visible chewing. You take one and poke at a bit of chicken caught in your teeth. Dignity maintained. Barely. Nearby, a man whispers about the breath control techniques of orators. Chicharo never ate garlic. Knew it ruined the wind. His friend nods solemnly while nibbling on a fennel seed. Fennel for breath. Cumin for stomach. Anise for everything else. You file that away under useful but miserable. Oh? Historians still argue whether Roman dinner etiquette stemmed from genuine health concerns or just upper-class competitiveness run wild. But in practice, it's clear. Food isn't just food. It's a test of grace, poise, and bodily restraint. A meal is as much about your image as your appetite. The main course arrives. Roasted duck with plum sauce, tiny pastries shaped like birds, and a suspicious dish labeled boiled sow's udder. You pass on that one. You're brave. But not that brave. You try a bit of the duck and immediately realize it's laced with asafoetida, pungent herb with a smell strong enough to chase off wolves, and probably half the appetite in the room. Adigestiu ate. Someone says helpfully. You smile through it, even though your tongue feels personally insulted. Halfway through the meal, someone excuses themselves. Not unusual. Vomiting mid-dinner isn't encouraged exactly, but it's tolerated. After all, if you want to keep eating without committing the sin of gluttony, sometimes the only answer is to make room. You stay reclined, chewing on a sliver of quince and pretending you didn't hear the discreet retching outside. At the end of the meal, the host brings out perfumed water for hand washing and a dish of coriander seeds to cleanse the mouth. You dutifully chew 3, trying not to make a face. They taste like soapy lemons. Not awful, but not great. Then comes the most dangerous part of the evening: conversation. Not because of the topics, which range from political gossip to which figs are in season, but because every word you say risks betraying that tiny bit of lentil still lodged in your teeth. You speak carefully, using hand gestures to avoid laughing too hard. One snort, and you might spray breadcrumbs. Unforgivable. You remember hearing once that Emperor Claudius banned all public farting laws for medical reasons. A bold move, but one that didn't catch on with polite society. In most homes, you're expected to clench with honor. Flatulence is failure. Unless you can blame it on the slaves. You make it to the end of the evening without embarrassment, which is a small miracle. As you step outside into the cooler air, your body feels tightens from the effort of holding in every burp, cough, and errant crumb. You imagine Roman etiquette teachers whispering about you later. Excellent parsley work, but too slow with the anise. As you lie down that night, your stomach unsettled from asafoetida and judgment. You wonder how anyone in this empire ever relaxed. Every bite is monitored, every breath judged. Even digestion is political. You close your eyes, thankful. No one asked you to sing a toast. You might have choked on your parsley. You wake with a jolt your dream, had you trapped in a narrow hallway, being chased by a wave of fermented fish sauce. You sit up, disoriented, blinking at the soft morning light spilling across the mosaic floor. It takes a second to remember where you are. A friend's domus, near the Circus Maximus. Recovering from another dinner party filled with digestive tension and several close parsley-related calls. But today, something finally clicks. You've decided to get to the bottom of it, the vomitorium myth. You've heard the whispers your whole life, that the Romans, so famously indulgent, built special rooms to purge their meals between courses, all in the name of continuing to gorge. You've even heard it used as a metaphor. He eats like he's got his own vomitorium. It's one of those facts that's so awful it feels true, but also suspiciously dramatic. You head to the public baths first, because that's where rumors tend to congealite, next to the strigils and oil jugs. The crowd is half naked, sweating, arguing philosophy, and scrubbing various crevices, all while casually snacking on olives. Someone mentions a senator who allegedly uses a golden feather to induce vomiting after eating too many oysters. A gold feather? Someone scoffs. How Gausche? Of grace. You ask about vomitoria. A few heads turn. One man raises an eyebrow. You mean the exits in amphitheaters? And just like that, the illusion starts to crack. It turns out the word vomitorium doesn't refer to a place for purging meals at all. It refers to the architectural design of large stadiums, the exit passages through which crowds could spew forth like liquid from a bottle. Functional, efficient, not even remotely digestive. You feel a little cheated. Honestly, you've imagined these elaborate rooms for years: velvet drapes, marble basins, discreet attendants handing you mint sprigs afterward. Turns out they're just doors. Boring, Echoey doors. Historians still argue about how the myth got started. Some think Renaissance writers misunderstood Roman texts. Others blame 19th century tour guides trying to spice things up. Either way, it stuck. A symbol of Roman excess, so potent. It became canon despite being completely wrong. But here's the twist. While vomitorium never meant vomit room, the act of vomiting during or after meals, that part is not entirely mythical. You've seen it hinted at in letters, satire, medical manuals. Emetics were used, not regularly by everyone, but enough to leave a trail of whispers. The elite, in particular, found ways to stretch their appetites and their definitions of moderation. You remember reading that the Emperor Claudius sometimes purged after eating, not as a habit, but to lighten himself before returning to duty. There are accounts of banquets lasting all night, where the food kept coming, and guests would disappear mid-course, only to return looking oddly refreshed. One poem describes a man retching into a servant's sleeve before calmly requesting another eel tart. That's not an architecture issue. That's a lifestyle. So, while vomitoria weren't rooms, Romans did sometimes make room. You spend the afternoon reading old scrolls at a neighbor's villa. He has a modest library and a very firm opinion on Roman gluttony. People think it was all feasts and feathers, he says, waving a piece of dried apple. But really, it was anxiety, performance. The stomach was a battlefield. And he shows you a passage from Seneca, who scolds those who empty their bellies just to refill them. They vomit so they can eat, and eat so they can vomit. He writes, appalled. You nod. That line has the tired energy of someone who's been to one too many banquets. As evening falls, you join a small gathering. Nothing fancy, just some bread, cheese, and a bit of fruit. But even here, you catch a woman quietly excusing herself after the third fig. You wonder if it's a coincidence. Probably not. You chew your bread slowly, thoughtfully. It's a little stale, but grounding. For once, no one's trying to out-fiber each other or debate the bile-cleansing merits of roux. When someone mentions the vomitorium myth again, you politely correct them. Actually, it refers to exits in amphitheaters. They blink. Really? You nod? But you add with a smirk. The puking part? That definitely happened. Just not in a dedicated room with cushions and tile mosaics. They laugh. You laugh too. But mostly because your stomach is behaving for once. Later, as you lie down in your friend's atrium, the night air cool against your skin, you feel oddly satisfied, not just with your meal, but with the clarity, in a culture where food is always a symbol, always a performance. It's refreshing to puncture a myth. So no. There are no actual vomitoria in the dining wing. But that doesn't mean the Romans didn't lose their lunches in creative, socially acceptable ways. They just did it quietly, with gold feathers and impeccable posture. You wake to the sound of a lyre being tuned badly, which is never a good omen. Outside, the sky is turning from deep violet to gray, and the marble floor beneath you feels colder than usual. You stretch, slowly, dreading the day ahead. You've been invited to visit a patrician household, not for a feast or a lecture, but for something much stranger, a tour of a noblewoman's health and beauty routine. You're not exactly sure what that means, but you've heard the rumors. Fasting, vinegar drinks, cabbage compresses, and some business with honey and crushed pearls. You brace yourself. The villa is enormous, all polished stone and faint perfume. Inside, the air hums with quiet tension. Servants glide through corridors carrying trays of dried fruit, rolled linen strips, and little jars that look suspiciously medical. You're ushered into a sunlit courtyard where Lady Aurelia reclines on a cushioned bench, pale as parchment and twice as breakable. She's beautiful in that fragile, haunted way Roman society seems to prize. You half expect her to dissolve into mist if the breeze picks up. She smiles faintly and gestures for you to sit. "We've just begun," she says. Her physician/beautician, a stiff man named Tertius, explains that she's on day 10 of a lettuce and vinegar cleanse. Lettuce for quieting the humors, vinegar for trimming excess flesh. He says it like he's reading from a scroll, which he probably is. You glance at Lady Aurelia's plate. It holds 2 wilted leaves and a dish of diluted honey water. She sips it like it's poison she's learned to tolerate. It's not just her. You've heard of noble women going days without solid food. Some reportedly chew ice chips made from snow carted down from the mountains, believing it keeps their skin tight. Others take small doses of chalk or clay to suppress appetite. One woman allegedly fasted for so long that she fainted while having her hair braided. A small price for discipline, her sister reportedly said, fanning herself dramatically. Historians still argue whether these extreme habits were common practice or just tales passed down to shame or admire the upper class. Either way, you're staring at the real consequences: sunken cheeks, brittle nails, and a wardrobe made entirely of judgment. Tertius continues his explanation, moving on to the honey vinegar tonic that Lady Aurelia takes every morning. It both purifies and prevents swelling. He says, as if swelling is a demon that needs banishing. You resist the urge to ask what it tastes like. Her face answers that question for you, slightly puckered, faintly nauseated, but determined. Later, you accompany her to the dressing room, where 2 servants gently rub her arms with crushed rose petals and almond oil. This, apparently, is to nourish what the lettuce cannot. You overhear one of them whisper that the neighbor's daughter eats only goat milk and raw carrots now. She's trying to get her waist under 9 inches. You want to scream. Instead, and you help carry a small tray to the courtyard, where Lady Aurelia is about to receive her afternoon energizer. A sniff of myrrh, a handful of pine nuts, and half a pomegranate seed. She lets it sit on her tongue like it's gold. You think about the men, too, how they train in the gymnasium, vomit at bathhouses, and fast between courses to maintain their slim, disciplined aesthetic. But the women, their rituals are quieter, sharper. You see it in the way they pass up dates at banquets, drink hot water with herbs while the men toast with wine, and smile through dizziness. You recall the story of Julia Livilla, Caligula's sister, who was once praised for her airiness of form, a polite way of saying she was practically skeletal. They said she refused figs for months, and lived on apple peels soaked in mint. You're not sure if that's true, but it wouldn't surprise you. Lady Aurelia excuses herself to rest, claiming a light headache. You suspect it's hunger. In the courtyard, her cousin Arrivastaller, fuller, clearly less interested in the vinegar cleanse. She eats a fig in full view of the servants. You admire her bravery. The two women greet each other with tight smiles. One starving, one fade, one praised for vanishing, the other judged for presence. It's an ancient, exhausting game. You sit beside a small marble fountain, your own stomach now echoing with the ghosts of all the food not eaten. You remember reading about early Roman midwives who recommended fasting for new mothers to keep them light and mobile. As if childbirth hadn't done enough already. There's a shelf in the villa's study filled with medical texts. One passage reads, "Too much food dulls the spirit. A sharp mind lives in a sharp frame." You wonder how many women read those lines while fainting. That evening, as you walk home, the streets are thick with spice cellars and bakery smoke. The scent of roasted nuts and fresh bread tempts you. But part of you still feels the weight of the afternoon, how powerful and dangerous hunger can be when disguised as virtue. You reach your door and pause. In your hand, a small satchel of barley cakes. You eat one. It's dry and crumbly and glorious. Because tonight, you don't want to vanish. You wake just before dawn. The sky still the color of ash. The air cool, with that peculiar Roman dampness that clings to the skin and makes your teeth itch. Today, you're off to observe a temple. Fasta, religious one this time. Not a cleanse. Not a virtue flex. But a full-blown spiritual hunger fest. You're not particularly devout. But curiosity and a mild sense of peer pressure have pulled you in. Your friend Servius meets you at the temple gates, already looking holier than thou, despite the bags under his eyes. Day 3. He whispers proudly, "I saw a vision of Mars last night. Told me to skip lentils." You nod solemnly, though you're fairly certain that was dehydration speaking. Inside the temple, the mood is reverent and quiet. A low hum of chanting echoes against the marble, mixing with the faint scent of incense and scorched olive oil. Worshippers are seated on mats in neat rows, eyes half-lidded, stomachs entirely empty. You settle beside a woman who mutters softly in Latin, clutching a withered pomegranate like a sacred relic. She hasn't eaten since last week. Today marks the Jejunium Cereris, a fasting rite in honor of Ceres, goddess of grain and agriculture. The irony, of course, is that you're fasting for a deity who represents food. Welcome to Roman religion, where nothing is ever quite straightforward. The high priest appears, draped in spotless white, and announces the day's ritual: water only, silence maintained, and no thoughts of indulgence. You immediately think of stuffed dormice, which feels like a sin. You bite the inside of your cheek and look appropriately repentant. As the sun rises higher, you begin to feel the fuzziness of an empty stomach, lightheaded, floaty, vaguely philosophical. You're not alone. Around you, others sway slightly, eyes closed, to faces serene with the kind of peace that often precedes fainting. Historians still argue whether these religious fasts were more spiritual or social. Some claim they were ancient attempts at divine alignment. Others, that they were performance art designed to demonstrate piety to your neighbors. Likely both, because in Rome, even your devotion is judged. You remember reading about early Christian ascetics in the desert who took fasting to brutal extreme, eating nothing but barley paste, surviving on dew, or lying on stone floors in self-denial marathons. Some saints were said to go weeks without food, claiming divine sustenance kept them going. You suspect divine sustenance tastes a lot like hallucination. Back in the temple, someone passes out. A soft thud, a flutter of robes, and the swift shuffle of sandals as attendants rush in with water and a damp cloth. No one reacts much. It happens. Hunger is holy here. A collapsing body is just another offering. By midday, your belly has turned into an echo chamber. Every movement sounds like thunder inside you. But still, you stay. You sip a cup of water with a sprig of mint floating in it. It's supposed to cleanse the mind. Instead, it reminds you of how badly you want a boiled egg. You sneak a glance at Servius. His eyes are closed, lips moving in silent prayer. Maybe he's just counting down the hours to dinner. He catches your look and gives the faintest smirk, like you're both in on the cosmic joke. Worship through weakness. Clarity through dizziness. Outside the temple, vendors pass by slowly with carts of sweets, spiced nuts, and dates. The scent wafts in. Torture. Intencional? Probably. The gods love a challenge. Or maybe it's the temple's way of separating the truly devoted from the snack curious. You remember the story of a Vestal virgin who accidentally swallowed a grape during a sacred fast. The punishment was severe, though the records are vague: exile, public shame, possibly being buried alive. Harsh for a grape. But that was the point. Control mattered more than comfort. Purity trumped pleasure. As the afternoon wears on, your thoughts become soft-edged and slippery. You try to meditate, but end up replaying a fantasy of warm bread and butter. Guilt follows. So does a rumble in your gut so loud, the man next to you opens one eye. By sunset, the fast ends not with fanfare, but a quiet bell and a small offering of unleavened barley cakes. They're bland, dry, and sacred. You chew slowly, pretending not to cry a little, as the crumbs dissolve on your tongue. Servius pats your shoulder. See? Clarity. You nod, though your brain feels like a sponge left out in the sun. But somewhere inside the emptiness, there's a strange calm. Not peace, exactly, but the absence of chaos. Maybe that's the point. You walk home under a darkening sky, each step feeling just a little more grounded. Your stomach still acts, but it's Keter now. You pass by a bakery. You smell honey. You keep walking. Back in your room, you curl up with a small fig and a cup of water. Just enough. You think about all the ways Romans use food to reach beyond themselves to the divine, to philosophy, to discipline. Sometimes it's ridiculous. Sometimes it's dangerous. But sometimes, just sometimes, it feels like something more. You fall asleep dreaming of Ceres, her arms full of grain, smiling gently as you nibble a barley cake in slow motion. You wake to the unmistakable sound of high society squealing drifting in through the courtyard windows. Someone, somewhere, is very excited about jellyfish. And that means you're about to witness another Roman elite brunch, where strange cravings become social events, and flavor is optional. Your host today is Lucilla, a wealthy widow with too much time, too many exotic pets, and a fondness for cuisine that borders on performance art. Her home is overflowing with imported carpets, ivory figurines, and a large bronze peacock that definitely doesn't double as a soup tureen. Though, you wouldn't be surprised if it did. You arrive late. As requested, no one is early to these things, and find the guests already gathered around a low marble table laden with foods that look more like experiments than snacks. There are jellyfish tentacles preserved in brine, tiny owl brains skewered on rosemary twigs, and one dish that's just labeled fermented hair paste. You sit down slowly, trying not to make eye contact with anything on the platter. Someone next to you pops a spiced locust into their mouth like it's a salted almond. Crunchy, they say cheerfully. Very slimming. You smile, grimace, and immediately start chewing on a date to hide your expression. Lucilla beams from her couch, draped in sheer linen and adorned with enough gold to reflect her mood lighting. "I've been experimenting," she says, waving a hand over the display. "All foods that stimulate the humors without encouraging fullness. My physician says the owl brains are especially good for memory." You consider arguing. But let's be honest, who's going to win a logic battle against someone drinking eel milk? Historians still argue whether these fringe foods were common or just reserved for the upper crust of Roman society, the people who turned snacks into statements. But the pattern is clear. If it's rare, weird, and vaguely medicinal, it's probably being served at a noblewoman's breakfast. Lucilla offers you a bite of boiled sea cucumber. "It's briny," she warns. You take a tiny taste. It's not terrible. It's also not food. More like a chewy metaphor for someone else's status. Next, come candied pine cones and rose petal jelly. One woman dips her fingers into a bowl of almond mash mixed with powdered coral. "Excellent for the skin," she murmurs, before licking her fingers delicately. You try not to think about the coral. You ask one guest how they decide what to eat. She shrugs. "Whatever my physician's latest scroll suggests," she says. "This week it's owl. Last week it was dried eel stomach. Next week, who knows, boiled hoof." A servant appears with a tray of drinks: vinegar cordial, fennel tonic, and something that smells like mint soaked in regret. You opt for the cordial. It burns on the way down, clears your sinuses, possibly your soul. You remember a story about Emperor Vitellius, who was said to eat flamingo tongues and brains of lampreys for breakfast. Probably exaggerated, but then again, after jellyfish with pickled celery, anything seems plausible. Lucilla gestures toward the final course: fig paste molded into the shape of Cupid's foot. "Symbolic," she explains. "Love and restraint." You wonder if Cupid would have preferred a proper meal. Later, as the guests recline and discuss digestion, you listen in. One man swears by snails stuffed with poppy seeds eases the mind. Another praises boiled peacock marrow, good for the complexion. A woman claims to have eaten nothing but boiled turnip water for a week and now hears music in her dreams. You nod slowly. That tracks. You sneak out as the guests start comparing the softest parts of the ostrich. Outside, the air is blessedly normal. Bread vendors shout, "Olive Schisle." For a moment, the city feels sane again. You grab a handful of street-roasted chickpeas from a passing cart. Hot, simple, crunchy, glorious. No symbolism, no debate. Just chickpeas. As you walk back toward your insula, you think about the need to make food magical, how people bend cuisine into identity, fashion, healing. Even owl brains become aspiration when you put enough gold around them. You reach home, still chewing. On the chickpeas? Yes. But also the thought, maybe the weirder the food, the more someone wants to prove they're above the ordinary. Regular meals are for regular people. The elite? They want to eat ambition. You lie down in the quiet of your room, belly weirdly full, and yet vaguely disappointed. You dream of simple lentils and wake to the scent of someone baking flatbread below your window. You close your eyes and imagine one soft bite. No jellyfish required. You wake to the rustling sound of papyrus being unrolled somewhere in the next room. That can only mean one thing: someone's reading a medical manual before breakfast. Again, you groan, stretch, and shuffle toward the atrium, where your cousin Gaius is already hunched over a scroll. A deeply concerned look on his face, and a plate of raw cucumbers in front of him. Galen says cucumbers are cooling. He explains without looking up. But dangerous if eaten in the wrong mood. You pose. Stare at the cucumber slices. Then, at Gaius. What mood are you currently in? He sighs, as if the question is impossibly naive. Neutral, melancholic. Or maybe bilious. He pops a cucumber slice into his mouth like it's a philosophical sacrifice. This is your life now. Meals dictated by the ancient equivalent of WebMD. Galen, of course, is the most famous Roman physician you've never wanted to quote. His influence spreads across kitchens, baths, and bedrooms, with his opinions on digestion, humors, and what time of day one should consume lentils, dominating every conversation that dares brush against the subject of food. According to him, everything you eat either warms or cools the body, dries or moistens it, balances or upsets the four vital humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Eggs are hot and moist. Lettuce is cold and dry. Wine is hot, unless you water it down, in which case it becomes sad and judgmental. Historians still argue whether Galen's nutritional advice made people healthier or just increasingly paranoid. After all, nothing ruins a snack like wondering whether it will thicken your bile. Today's breakfast is a thin porridge of spelt, boiled in water with a pinch of ground cumin. Gaius claims it's good for soothing the spleen. You try a bite? It tastes like defeat. Not offensive. Just boring. A culinary shrug. Your aunt enters the room, carrying a clay pot of dried dates. Careful, she warns. They inflame the liver if eaten after noon. You glance at the sun. It's close. You chew faster. Later, at the marketplace, You pass stalls hawking scrolls of Galen's dietary rules copied out by shaky hands. Young men in tunics debate whether onions increase lust or merely irritate the gallbladder. A woman asks if she should eat boiled fennel during her moon cycle. The seller nods sagely. Fennel for flow, he intones. You pick up a small packet of dried mint leaves. For clarity, the vendor whispers, as if mint is sacred. You nod solemnly and hand over a coin. There's even a whole section of the market now devoted to Galenic prescriptions fruits sorted by temperament. Legumes classified by moisture level. Somewhere, Galen is smiling smugly from the afterlife. You overhear a man saying he switched from apples to pears because Galen warned apples can block the belly's pathways. You wonder what that means exactly, but wisely choose not to ask. Lunch is a deliberate act. You sit with a bowl of lentils, a bit of boiled egg, and a splash of watered wine. You chew slowly, hyper-aware of every texture and temperature. Gaius reads aloud from his scroll as you eat. Avoid mixing hot foods with cold. Never eat fish after a sour cheese. And, under no circumstance should you consume cabbage with honey. You pause mid-bite. Has anyone actually done that? Lucilla did, he says grimly. She was dizzy for 3 days. Oh, afternoon arrives. And you join a small group for a digestive stroll. A post-lunch walk. Highly recommended by Galenic wisdom. Prevent stagnation, says one walker. Rubbing his belly, you pass a statue of Hippocrates and tip an imaginary hat. As the sun dips low, dinner becomes a gamble. Your uncle insists on boiled dandelion roots. They dry the spleen, he explains, and make dreams vivid. You make a note to avoid sleeping near him. The final meal of the day is modest. A few olives, a fig, and a cup of lukewarm herb water. Galen warned against late-night indulgence, claiming it disrupted dreams and led to nocturnal unrest. You're not entirely sure what that means, but you're not risking it. You lie in bed later, stomach lightly full, brain swirling with phrases like temperament and excess moisture. The moon glows through the shutters. You wonder how many people in Rome fell asleep thinking about their gallbladders. You drift into sleep, imagining Galen himself, seated at a table, scowling at a peach and warning you about its phlegmatic undertones. You eat it anyway. Because sometimes, even in a world obsessed with balance, you just want something juicy. You wake to a thud outside your window and the sound of someone loudly declaiming about the futility of shoes. That can only mean one thing. The cynics are back in town, and one of them has apparently decided your alley is a perfect spot for his barefoot, bean-fueled morning rant. You sit up, blink blearily at the sunlight, and reach for your sandals, then stop, just in case he launches into a tirade about the evils of leather. You've decided to spend the day shadowing a cynic philosopher. It's not your best idea. But you're still recovering from Gaius's cucumber saga and figure a new kind of misery might be refreshing. Diogenes, original Cynicus, long gone. But his followers carry the torch proudly, living simply, rejecting societal norms, and eating food so plain, it makes your military rations look indulgent. You meet your guide for the day near the steps of the library. His name is Marcus, and he greets you with a nod and a half-eaten onion. He's barefoot, wearing a simple wool cloak with a hole in the shoulder. And he smells like someone who hasn't seen a sponge in weeks. "Ready for breakfast?" he asks. You are not. Breakfast turns out to be lentils. Cold, boiled, unseasoned, served in a chipped clay bowl and eaten with fingers. Flavor is vanity. Marcus says, chewing with eyes closed. Seasoning clouds the soul. You nod slowly, chewing your own portion, which tastes like regret and damp pottery. As you walk with him through the streets, he occasionally pauses to mock vendors loudly. "Why pay for grapes when figs fall from the trees?" he shouts at a fruit seller. "Why wear robes when the gods gave us skin?" At one point, he stares down a goat for 3 full minutes, then declares it his equal. The goat seems unimpressed. You pass by a patrician villa where a banquet is being prepared. Servants bustle. Spices hang in the air. Marcus wrinkles his nose. They eat decadence and call it nourishment. You note again. Stomach rumbling a little. You try to focus on his lecture about the dangers of luxury. But someone nearby drops a tray of roasted chickpeas, and your eyes betray you. "Ah," Marcus says, catching your gaze. "Temptation." He hands you a rock. "Hold this. It will remind you that hunger is only sensation." And you hold the rock. Lunch is even worse. Marcus produces a small pouch of barley gruel that's gone a bit sour. "Fermented with purpose," he says proudly. "It sharpens the mind. It also numbs your taste buds and nearly makes your teeth clench into retirement." You swallow bravely. He leads you to the edge of the forum, where he sets down his cloak and sits in the dust. You sit beside him, clutching the rock and wondering how many days it's been since he saw a fig or a soap basin. The afternoon heat rises. You nap briefly on the stone. When you wake, Marcus is arguing with a senator about olives. A man who cannot endure bitterness cannot endure life, he says, spitting an olive pit dramatically. The senator walks away. Marcus looks pleased. Historians still argue whether cynic philosophers truly lived by their principles, or if some of them secretly enjoyed the occasional honeyed nut. But from the smell and tone of Marcus's voice, you're pretty sure he's the real deal. No spices. No sandals. No shame. As the sun begins to set, Marcus offers you a final meal. Half a turnip and a crust of bread so hard you could use it as a doorstop. "This is freedom," he says. "No kitchens. No recipes. No pretending." You chew slowly. The bread cracks slightly. Your molars threaten rebellion. Still, there's something clean about it. Stark. Uncomplicated. That night, instead of returning home, you follow Marcus to a quiet patch near the Tiber where a few other cynics are gathered. Debating ethics and snacking on wild herbs they picked along the riverbank. One offers you a leaf. "Very bitter," he says with a grin. "You'll hate it." You accept the leaf. He's right. But in that bitter chew, you realize something strange. This isn't about asceticism for its own sake. It's about control. About saying no in a world where everyone else says yes too quickly. It's not your style, but you understand it as you lie back on the grass. The stars blinking awake overhead. Your belly quiet and your mind surprisingly clear. You think about Diogenes, who once lived in a barrel and told Alexander the Great to stop blocking his sunlight. You get it now. Sometimes, saying no is its own kind of feast. Still, tomorrow, you're eating something with salt. You wake to the sound of a pot crashing somewhere in the neighbor's kitchen, followed by a loud, shrill accusation. I told you not to touch the leeks before the Callans. You blink into the morning light, still tangled in your blanket, and realize you've stumbled directly into the ridiculous but very real world of seasonal food superstitions. Welcome back to Rome, where your breakfast options may be decided not by hunger or taste, but by the stars, the gods, and whichever elderly relative last consulted a lunar chart carved on wax. You roll out of bed and wander toward the Forum, hoping to grab something simple, some figs, a bit of bread, maybe a plum if you're feeling wild. But the moment you reach the market, you feel it in the air. Not the heat or the dust, no. It's the hum of worry. The vendors are whispering about omens, muttering about unfavorable winds, and flat out refusing to sell certain produce. One woman shouts, "No lentils until the next full moon. I'm not risking a household curse." Another clutches a basket of fava beans like it's rigged with traps. You're about 3 seconds from turning around when Cassia, your highly opinionated and slightly superstitious friend, grabs you by the elbow and pulls you deeper into the fray. "We can't have leeks today," she says before you even speak. Not after that thunderstorm. It invites phlegm and weakens the spleen. You blink at her. "And if I'm okay with a weak spleen?" She frowns. "Then you'll die. Or worse, bloat. End of craze." And that's how your simple shopping trip becomes a dance with the divine. You trail behind Cassia as she zips through the stalls like a priestess with a produce agenda. She smells every herb, examines every fig, interrogates every vendor. "These grapes were picked on a dies, Ader?" she gasps. "I'd sooner eat a toad." The vendor shrugs, muttering something about how the gods can't possibly be watching every grape. But Cassia is already gone, muttering about ill omens and bladder stones. According to Herond, about half the Roman population, you shouldn't eat eggs in spring, cabbage during a south wind, or anything circular during Mercury's retrograde. Historians still argue whether these beliefs came from religion, astrology, or just a collective agreement to make every meal feel like a high-stakes gamble. But the effect is the same. Your stomach answers to the sky now. As you pass a honey merchant, Cassia whispers, "No honey today." You sigh. "Why not?" "Because the moon is waning." She replies. Sweetness fades too fast and invites false friendships. You blink. "What does that mean?" She shrugs. "It's what Ovid wrote. Or maybe my aunt. Either way." She waves off the merchant and pulls you toward the grain stall. "Here." Things are slightly saner. Barley is always acceptable, so long as it hasn't touched bronze. Wheat? Fine. But not if it was ground on an odd-numbered day. Rye? Dangerous this close to an equinox. You buy a small bag of emmer and immediately feel like a criminal. Somewhere, Jupiter is judging you, probably through a cloud. Lunch is even more complicated. You sit with Cassia on a shady step near the Temple of Vesta, sharing a meal of boiled chickpeas, mint leaves, and something that might be an overripe apricot. You reach for a plum, but she slaps your hand. No plums during the waning moon. They rot your dreams. You don't know what that means either. But your appetite slowly begins to wither. Across from you, an elderly man crunches loudly on a pomegranate and then freezes mid-bite. He turns pale, spits the seed onto the cobblestones, and mutters a prayer. It's the wrong solstice. He whispers, "I've made a terrible mistake." A woman gasps. A child starts crying. The entire market seems to shudder. You quietly push your fig behind your back. You spend the afternoon trying to make sense of it all. Seasonal foods aren't just about ripeness. They're tied to omens, gods, planetary alignments, and medical theories. So old, they might have been invented during a fever dream. Celery is said to provoke lust if eaten on a Tuesday, unless you boil it, which makes it neutral. Fish must not be eaten after the first harvest moon. Mushrooms are only safe on odd-numbered days, unless picked by a left-handed person. Even the doctors get involved. Galen warned that spring foods invited imbalance, that autumn herbs dried the blood, and that winter citrus should be paired with long walks and stern self-reflection. You once heard of a senator who blamed his gout on eating asparagus during the wrong equinox. He then banned it from his household and commissioned a statue of fennel. His wife was not amused. That evening, as the market quiets and the sky melts into lavender, you sit by a street vendor roasting chickpeas over coals. The smell is perfect. Warm. Nottu. Comforting. Kas sinä hesitates? Can we? She asks. It's almost the third watch. You both stare at the stars. Eventually, she shrugs. Well, if it brings bad luck, we'll just cleanse with rue tomorrow. You both laugh. Buy 2 small paper cones of chickpeas and eat quietly by the fountain. The gods. It seems you can take a night off. Back in your room, you lie on your cot, belly gently full, head spinning from all the rules you tried to follow. There are entire scrolls devoted to seasonal menus based on wind patterns, planetary transitions, and whether your mother dreamt of goats the night before. You understand now why some people gave up and just ate barley forever. You look at the small plum you snuck into your satchel and hold it in your hand. It's cool, smooth, and glowing faintly in the candlelight. You consider taking a bite. Maybe Mercury's in a forgiving mood tonight. Or maybe you'll wake up tomorrow with cursed ankles. Either way, you eat it. It's perfect. You wake to the sound of distant shouting, not the usual, "Who stole my goat" kind of shouting, but a raw, panicked sort that tells you something has gone terribly, stomach-turningly wrong. You sit up slowly, your mat creaking under you, and notice the smell first. Acrid, metallic, and faintly sour, like old iron boiled in vinegar. You peek outside. Smoke, dust, movement. Whatever calm existed yesterday has vanished. And then it hits Ukraine. Delivery's been cut off. Again, Rome is in crisis. Not the dramatic, marble statue toppling kind you see on coins, but the slow, grinding collapse of supply lines. There's a war to the north, a skirmish near Carthage, and some general forgot to send the boats with the wheat. That means famine. Or if not famine yet, something close enough to taste. You wrap your cloak tightly and follow the rumble of the crowd toward the market district. There, the stalls are bare. The fish are gone. The lentils are gone. Even the stale barley loaves have disappeared. A vendor sits beside an empty cart and stares into the middle distance like he's already passed through several emotional stages and just given up. Someone tries to barter a ring for half a melon rind. No takers. You remember what your uncle told you once. Rome doesn't starve like the provinces do. It panics first. And you see that panic now nobles locking their pantry doors. Citizens clutching jars of chickpeas like newborns. A child crying because someone just kicked over a pot of turnip mash. Back home, you take stock. A few dried figs. A pouch of farro. Half a wedge of hard cheese you're not entirely sure is still edible. You ration it instinctively, even though no one said ration aloud yet. But it's coming. You can feel it. That afternoon, you see someone boiling leather sandals in a public square. Not as a joke, as dinner. Historians still argue whether these stories of people eating boiled leather or tree bark during food shortages were exaggerations. But standing there, watching the bubbles rise around a sandal strap, you're inclined to believe them. The man waves a piece of boiled hide and offers a trade. 2 spoons for a fig? You shake your head and walk away quickly. Elsewhere, people are getting creative. You hear of someone roasting sawdust cakes to simulate bread texture. Someone else is selling a broth made from old cabbage leaves and river stones. They claim it's nutritious. You suspect it's mostly hope. By sunset, you're hungry. Not the dainty, philosophical kind of hungry Seneca would write about, but the real, creeping kind that wraps itself around your ribs and makes your jaw ache. You chew a piece of that old cheese. It tastes like ash and longing. You eat it anyway. That night, the city feels quieter, as if even the stones are waiting for someone to fix everything. You sit near a neighbor's fire and listen to him tell a story about a famine during Augustus's time, when citizens rioted over flour and the emperor had to import grain from 6 provinces just to keep people calm. He says it like a bedtime tale, but you catch the tightness in his voice. You dream of bread, fresh, soft, with honey and poppy seeds. You can almost taste it. Then you wake up. Your mouth dry. The dream gone. In its place, a growling belly and a cracked jar of barley you hope will last until next week. The next morning, you join a long line outside the granary. There's a rumor grain has arrived from Ostia. You wait. And wait. Hours pass. Eventually, someone says the shipment was redirected to the army. More waiting. Then the line dissolves into quiet anger. You make eye contact with a woman holding a child and offering a single onion in exchange for bread. You hand her your last fig. She doesn't smile, just nods, and walks away. In times like this, food becomes more than survival. It becomes currency, religion, memory. People trade not just for calories but for comfort. A taste of normal. One bite of before, later. A man offers to share his feast, a stew made of water, herbs, and a handful of dried lentils. It's warm, filling in a loose, emotional sense. You eat with him in silence, watching the city lights flicker under a sky that no longer feels reassuring. Before bed, You crush the last of your farro into a coarse paste. You boil it with some mint. The smell is sharp, calming. You sip slowly. This is what's left. You savor it, and still, somehow, in the darkness, there's a strange peace. Hunger sharpens the senses. You listen to the hush of the wind, the scrape of pottery, the distant crackle of someone else's fire. Rome is starving, but it hasn't stopped moving, and neither have you. You wake to the sound of soft crying, echoing off the stone walls of your courtyard, a child. By the sound of it, you sit up, muscles stiff from a rough sleep, and move toward the shutter. The dawn light filters in pale and dusty, and down below, a young boy clings to his mother's robes as she drags him away from a food vendor's stall. His small fists are clenched. The vendor's hands are raised. The bread is gone, and so is any pretense that this week will be normal. You watch silently as the mother murmurs something, wiping the child's tears with the edge of her sleeve. He's too young to understand scarcity, but he's old enough to understand disappointment and hunger. That, it seems, is a Roman lesson that starts early. As you make your way into the market district, the emptiness hits you harder than usual. The stalls aren't quite empty, but they're not full either. What's there feels hesitant. Tired vegetables, dried goods, priced twice what they were last month. A new sign scrawled in charcoal on a cart reads, "No credit. No arguments. Don't ask." Your friend Julius waves you over near the fig vendors. He has 3 children at home, and a deep crease between his eyes that wasn't there last spring. "The bread's gone again," he says quietly. "Even the husk loaves. I traded a bronze ring for 4 barley cakes. They're mostly ash and old flour. Hard." You nod, trying not to look at the scrawny dog sniffing the empty grain sacks. It's a strange thing to mourn breadcrumbs. But you do. Children in Rome are not spared the complexities of adult appetite. They grow into a world where food is both basic need and social test. There's no soft, predictable diet designed for little stomachs. They eat what their parents eat often, the same tired porridge, dry legumes, or bitter greens. Unless you're rich. Of course, if you're rich, you get milk-soaked wheat cakes, honeyed almonds, roasted quail leaven for breakfast. You pass a group of children sitting in a shaded corner, passing a single fig back and forth. One takes a bite, then licks his fingers ceremoniously. Another pulls a tiny pouch from his tunica, few dried lentils, polished like stones. "For later," he says, cradling them like treasure. You want to look away, but you can't. There's something both heartbreaking and oddly dignified in how children learn to measure value one crumb at a time. Cassia meets you near the baths, carrying her niece Claudia on her hip. Claudia looks flushed, hair stuck to her cheeks with sweat. She hasn't eaten. Cassia mutters. "We gave her my portion yesterday. I told her it was a holiday." And you hand her the single pear you've been saving. Cassia doesn't protest. She just takes it with a tired nod and breaks it in half. Claudia grabs her share and bites deep. The juice drips down her chin. She doesn't wipe it. Later, you sit on a bench near the temple of Juno and share lunch with a few neighbors. It's modest barley mash, some rosemary, a shared olive sliced into wedges. One boy, no older than 6, gets the largest piece of the olive. No one says anything. It's just understood. A woman across from you tells a story about Emperor Claudius supposedly outlawing grape juice for children because he believed it stirred rebellion in young hearts. Historians still argue whether that was actually law or just one of many half-mad policies from a ruler fond of sleepwalking through governance. Either way, you believe it. Rome has rules for everything. Why not how toddlers chew? Nearby, a group of schoolboys recites Virgil, eyes darting nervously toward their teacher, who stands with a reed in one hand and a small bag of raisins in the other. Rewards for the diligent, he says, and water for the lazy. You watch one boy mumble a line, stumble, and receive nothing. His shoulders slump. Another nails 3 lines and earns a raisin. He doesn't eat it, just holds it. You visit a nearby domus, where a wealthy family has invited a few clients for dinner. The contrast is immediate. Children run through the halls with sticky fingers and honeyed mouths. One tosses a candied walnut at another. A nursemaid chases after them with a cloth. They've never had to count olives. You slip back outside quickly. The taste of envy, sour on your tongue. In the insula later, you hear someone boiling roots in their courtyard fire. The smell is bitter. A girl stands beside the pot, barefoot, holding a bowl. For my baby brother, she says, not meeting your eyes. He's still nursing. But we mix it in. He doesn't notice. You give her your last handful of chickpeas. You weren't sure what you'd do with them anyway. Back in your room, you lie on your mat with the window open, letting in the scent of rain clouds building over Aventine Hill. Your belly aches, but not just from hunger. It's the ache of watching small hands make grown-up decisions, of seeing generosity sharpened by necessity. You remember a story someone told you about children in the countryside who'd chew laurel leaves just to feel their mouths full, or city boys who'd stuff stale straw into fig skins to trick their siblings into thinking it was still sweet. Not lies, just survival, dressed as imagination. You close your eyes and picture Claudia licking the pear juice from her wrist. Eyes closed, like she's never tasted anything finer. Maybe she hasn't. And you wonder, in a city that feeds its pride more than its poor, who decides what's indulgent and what's just enough? You promise yourself, again, that if tomorrow brings even a crust, you'll break it in half. You wake to the slap of sandals against damp stone, rhythmic and impatient, like someone late for a treatment. From your cot, the morning air smells faintly of rosemary and vinegar. Someone must be steeping herbs already. That scent tells you exactly what day it is. Market day. Yes, but more specifically, the day you promised to visit Flavius, old, sharp-tongued Flavius, who claims he's outlived 2 wives, 1 war, and more bad cabbage than any man should legally eat. He always says, I've got no teeth, but I've still got opinions. You find him seated outside his modest home, already chewing a wedge of boiled turnip with the slow, deliberate focus of a man convinced this root is the key to eternal life. You're late? He grunts, not looking up. I've aged 3 months waiting for you, and my knees say the air's thick with imbalance. He shoves a cup of something warm into your hands before you can respond. You sip. It tastes like the inside of a musty spice drawer, left out in the sun. Goat, throat herbs, he says proudly. Crushed them myself. Fixes the liver and clears evil thoughts. Unless you've got too many of those already. Oh, go. In Rome, food and health are married tighter than a patrician to their family estate. You're not eating just to live, you're eating to heal. Prevent. Balance. And occasionally summon the favor of Jupiter. Most people trust their physicians only slightly less than they trust their bakers. And that's saying something. Flavius walks you through his herbal collection rows of hanging bundles that fill the space with a pungent mix of bay, rue, and dried fennel. He's not a physician. Not exactly. But he's lived long enough to qualify as something close. Galen was right about the spleen, he mutters, but wrong about figs. I knew a man who ate one every day and went blind from lust. How you raise an eyebrow. From figs? From the lust, he says. But the figs didn't help. The ancient belief in humoral theory, the idea that your body is ruled by 4 humors, blood, and phlegm, black bile, and yellow bilice, still king in Rome, hot and cold, wet and dry. These polarities decide what you should eat, and when. Feeling sluggish? That's excess phlegm boil. Some leaks. Heart racing? Your blood's too hot, cool it with lettuce or cucumber. And if you dream of snakes, as Flavius did last week, that means your bile is agitated. Only bitter greens for 3 days. He hands you a dried date and insists it helps with melancholy. You chew it, unsure whether the chewiness is medicinal or accidental. Nearby, a woman grinds poppy seeds into a paste to help her mother sleep. Another man soaks celery in red wine, claiming it calms heart palpitations and wards off unwanted suitors. Historians still argue whether Roman food-based medicine was actually effective or simply the illusion of control in a chaotic world. But even skeptics admit the Romans took it seriously. No meal was ever just a meal. It was therapy, spiritual realignment, and preventative care, all at once. As the sun climbs, Flavius leads you through a row of public herb gardens cared for by temple attendants and old soldiers. One elderly man with a twisted ankle swears by a poultice made of mashed beans and ox saliva. Another sells dried chicory to help flush the heat from your gut, though no one's quite sure what that means. A woman nearby offers you a sprig of wild thyme to guard against sorrow, she says, and bad weather. You take it? It smells like something between tea and regret. For lunch, Flavius insists on boiled beets and a barley cake slathered with garlic paste. Garlic sharpens the mind. He tells you, unless you eat too much, then it makes you speak in tongues. He snorts. But that might be the wine talking. He pours you a cup of sour red that tastes like vinegar and burnt plum. Good for the joints, he adds, cracking his knuckles for emphasis. You tell him about your dream walking barefoot through a garden where the plants whispered cures to your ailments. He nods solemnly. That was your liver speaking. It wants coriander. Oak. By mid-afternoon, you're dizzy with herbs. People all around the forum are stirring concoctions, swallowing odd things, boiling roots, and chewing on resin. One vendor is even selling pickled garlic wrapped in fig leaves to prevent aging, he claims, or at least make you forget how old you are. Oh. You sit by a public fountain and watch a man dip celery stalks into salted honey, reciting a prayer to Minerva as he eats. Another crushes dried mustard seeds into goat milk, then sniffs it like perfume. You overhear someone say that Emperor Tiberius once banned onions in the Senate because they made tempers short. Whether that's true or not, no one dares bring one near the rostra. Back in Flavius's courtyard, he brews a thick tea of rue and vinegar and offers you a spoonful to prevent betrayal. He says, "I give it to visitors, just in case." You sip it carefully. It tastes like regret and floor cleaner. Works every time. He says, pleased. As the sun begins to drop, Flavius sits with a cloth over his forehead and murmurs a recipe for calming thoughts. Fennel seeds, 1 olive pit, and a whisper from someone you love. Memory and digestion are twins. He says, neglect one. The other sours. Oh. You walk home under a heavy sky, your body filled with more herbs than food. You pass people sipping warm cumin water or chewing parsley stems dipped in vinegar. A child skips by holding a sprig of mint between her teeth like a victory banner. Back in your room, you crush a bay leaf between your palms and let the scent rise like steam. You lie down, unsure whether you've been nourished or hexed, but somehow feel better all the same. Maybe it's placebo, maybe it's magic, or maybe Flavius was right. It's not what you eat, he said once. It's why, and tonight, you eat to remember that you're still here. You wake to the low hum of bees hovering just outside your shutters, their wings buzzing like tiny drums in the morning air. It's not unusual your neighbor Marius, the honey vendor. He likes to leave scraps of comb near the window ledge, hoping to lure bees for his rooftop hives. Sometimes they return the favor by not stinging him. You breathe in the faint scent of warm wax, pollen, and dried fruit drifts into your room like a sweet omen. Today feels different, less like survival, more like anticipation. Your stomach doesn't grumble out of desperation for lentils or bitter greens. No. This morning, you're craving something decadent, something soft and golden and completely unnecessary. You want sweetness. You want Roman indulgence. You make your way through the winding alleyways toward the market. Already, the signs are everywhere. A boy skipping with sticky fingers, a baker's apprentice holding up a tray of golden pastries, like a priest offering salvation. Even the birds seem a little more excitable, chirping as they fight over dried fig scraps. Cassia's voice echoes in your mind. The body wants what the gods deny. You've denied a lot lately. Maybe today you let the body win. At the far corner of the forum, Marius greets you with a smile too wide for the hour. Ah, the hungry philosopher. He calls, here to taste truth on a spoon. He's already dipped one in his prized batch honey infused with thyme, collected from hives kept near the Aventine Hill temples. 1 drop for clarity, he says. 2 for joy. 3, and you'll start singing like a lark. And you taste it. Thick, golden, herbal-like, drinking the memory of summer. You nod approvingly. And he grins. That'll be a copper. And Roman society doesn't yet know refined sugar. No crystallized mountains of cane or beets. What they have is honey. Pure, versatile, and, for those with coin, endlessly delightful. The wealthy add it to nearly everything: meats, fruits, bread, wine, even fish. Recipes for dormice, stuffed with honey-soaked pine nuts, pass around noble kitchens like gossip. You once heard of a woman who drizzled honey over her oysters and swore it improved both digestion and romance. Historians still argue whether it was sensual or just ill-advised. After leaving Marius's stall, you wander toward the sweet cellars under the shade of an old aqueduct. There's a woman there, slicing a fresh labuma, small cake of cheese and honey, offered to household gods, technically sacred, but you see more mortals eating it than lares. You exchange a few figs for a piece and take a bite. It crumbles delicately, the cheese sharp, the honey mellow. It sticks to your teeth like a good memory. Cassia spots you near the fountain, eyes narrowing. "Sweets for breakfast?" she asks. Pretending to judge you, she has half a candied date in her hand. "Hypocrite," you say, and she shrugs. It's a feast day. It isn't, but that doesn't stop either of you. The obsession with sweetness is ancient. Honey, especially, plays double-duty medicine and indulgence. Roman doctors recommend it for coughs, wounds, melancholy, and sore eyes. They even use it to preserve fruit, and sometimes meat. You remember hearing that Galen once wrote an entire scroll on the virtues of honey as a balancing agent for the humors. "Too much bile," he wrote, "drink honey water. Too much blood, sweeten with restraint." You're not sure if that last part was literal or moral advice. You pass a temple courtyard where two children are dipping crusts of bread into warm honeyed milk. They're silent in the way only completely satisfied people can be. It strikes you how different these small indulgences are from the usual Roman diet: stark, salty, repetitive. A spoon of sweetness here is rebellion. At midday, you join a small feast hosted by one of Cassia's uncles, a minor scribe with delusions of culinary grandeur. He serves bread sprinkled with sesame and honey, followed by stuffed figs, then roasted carrots, glazed in reduced grape, There's even a dessert: pear slices stewed in wine and cloves, topped with whipped goat cheese and drizzled honey. The table sighs in unison with every bite. Someone jokes about Emperor Elagabalus, who was said to have bathed in rosewater and insisted his kitchen staff make snow-cooled desserts using imported mountain ice. One guest rolls their eyes. He also once served peas covered in gold flakes. The man wouldn't recognize a lentil if it hit him in the face. Ugh. You laugh, but wonder, was it decadence or desperation to escape Rome's tasteless sameness? Even the nobility got bored of barley eventually. Later, you pass a healer's shop where honey cakes are stacked beside jars of dried lavender and willow bark. A sign reads, "For heartache, 3 bites before dusk." Another offers honey wine lozenges to inspire love or clear phlegm. You buy one, unsure which you need more. That evening, you sit by the Tiber with Cassia and a few others. Someone brings out pine nut candies wrapped in fig leaves, tied with strings of dried thyme. You each take one. The sweetness lingers on your tongue, earthy and floral. It makes you quiet. You ask aloud, "Do you think it's better to eat for strength or joy?" No one answers right away. Then Cassia murmurs, "What's the difference?" "Really?" As night settles in, you walk the long way home, past the darkened stalls, past the empty baskets that once held honeycomb and candied walnuts, past the baker sweeping crumbs from his threshold. You feel the sugar still coating your teeth, the warmth still soft in your belly. Rome feeds you many things: fear, grit, routine. But today, it gave you sweetness. Real, unapologetic sweetness. And even though you know tomorrow's likely to be boiled leeks and vinegar-soaked cabbage, you're okay with that. Because once in a while, even in a brutal world, you get to taste joy and let it melt on your tongue. You wake with your mouth dry and your stomach oddly light, not quite hungry, but suspicious. Yesterday's indulgence still lingers on your breath, a faint memory of honey, thyme, and something vaguely spiced that might have been joy, or cloves, or both. But as the sun angles through your shutters, you know today won't be sweet. No bees buzzing, no sticky fingers, no sugared figs. Today smells like vinegar and boiling greens. Today is a fasting day. Or, at least, it is for some. Downstairs, the streets are quiet in the way. That means rules are in play, religious ones. You pass two women murmuring as they sprinkle flour at their doorstep, hands folded like they're trying not to tempt the gods. A little boy tries to steal a date from a cart, but his mother slaps his hand. "It's the wrong day," she hisses. "Do you want to call misfortune?" Roman fasting isn't what you'd call organized. There's no central rule book. No papal calendar. No. Monday meat bands. Instead, it's a swirling mess of rituals, omens, priestly warnings, lunar faces, and family tradition. 1 month you're forbidden from eating garlic during Mars's festival. The next, you're avoiding lentils because your uncle dreamed of a lizard. And don't even get started on eclipse weeks. Everyone becomes an amateur astrologer with indigestion. Still, despite the chaos, there's one uniting principle. On certain days, you simply don't eat. Or you eat less. Or, worse, you eat intentionally. You've heard that term tossed around by temple servants. Intentional eating. As if barley gruel can become profound if you think sad enough thoughts while chewing. Cassia meets you near the Tiber, face pinched. "My aunt's fasting," she says, "which means we all are." You offer her half a dried fig. She stares at it like it's a snake in disguise. "I'm not trying to get struck by lightning." So instead, you walk. Walking is safe. It doesn't require chewing. And it keeps your mind off your stomach. You pass a group of Vestal virgins, placing salt cakes on a stone altar. No one speaks. One priestess breaks a cake in half and crumbles it into the river. You wonder if the fish appreciate the gesture. According to old tradition, fasting keeps Rome in harmony. It's not about weight or willpower, it's about cosmic balance. Eating too much on the wrong day could upset the gods, unbalance the numen, even invite plague. One story says a man once ate pork during a purification ritual, and his entire household caught fire 3 days later. Historians still argue whether that's coincidence or creative priestly marketing. Back at the market, The stalls are open, but quiet. Vendors whisper. Buyers haggle softly. And nobody samples anything. You see a basket of fresh peaches and feel your mouth flood with longing. But you look away. There's something eerily powerful about collective restraint. It hangs in the air like steam. Cassia drags you into a shaded courtyard where an old woman named Vibia is selling ritual fast food. No, not that kind. She offers chickpea mash, barley cakes baked without seasoning, and a broth made of water, celery, and crushed lovage root. Good for clarity, she says. And bowel humility? Oh. You taste the mash. It's chalky and bland. The kind of food that makes you question whether chewing is worth the effort. The broth is better thin, but soothing, like warm rain. You drink slowly, pretending it's tea. Cassia breaks first. By late afternoon, she buys a single olive and chews it like it's a sin. Technically, I didn't swallow, she whispers. You don't judge her? You'd have licked a fig leaf by now if someone handed you one. That evening, you join her family for a modest, fast-breaking meal, barely worthy of the word meal. Just boiled dandelion greens, some unleavened bread, and a tiny cup of vinegar wine. Toklense. Her uncle says, Torealain. Oh, you sit with your bowl, chewing thoughtfully, not because you believe it purifies your spirit, but because it slows your thoughts. There's a kind of strange magic in eating without desire, without distraction, just existing with the food, not chasing it. Later, you remember something Flavius once said. The Romans don't fast because it's holy. They fast because they're afraid. Afraid of angering the wrong god, of mistiming an offering, of slipping into decadence and inviting fate's correction. Fasting is less about virtue and more about control. And in a world ruled by omens, weather, and emperors with wild hair, control is precious. You fall asleep with your belly still echoing the broth, your fingers still smelling faintly of vinegar and salt. You didn't feast. You didn't indulge. But somehow, you feel cleaner, like the edges of your thoughts have been sharpened. It won't last. Tomorrow, someone will be roasting goat near your window, and all this cosmic balance will feel like yesterday's superstition. But tonight, your body is quiet, your mind is quiet, and maybe, just maybe, the gods are too. You rise to the sound of clinking pots and the soft whistle of steam curling through alleyways. Someone's cooking early. And it isn't soup. Your nose lifts before your eyes even open. Roasted garlic, charred onion, maybe even pork fataday smells like indulgence. The kind that makes neighbors peek over their balconies and quietly resent whoever lit the fire first. You sit up, blink into the daylight, and feel a familiar pang in your ribs. After yesterday's fast, even the air feels edible. Today is not a festival day. It's not a ritual observance or a mourning period. It's just a feast. A totally ordinary Roman overcompensation day, where someone, somewhere, decided enough. Self-denial was enough. And now it's time to overdo everything. You follow your nose down the street, and the aroma thickens like fog. A group of slaves are turning a small pig on a spit. its belly stuffed with dried fruits and herbs. One of them bastes it with honeyed wine, while another tosses rosemary into the fire just to perfume the flames. They work with the discipline of surgeons and the joy of children sneaking extra sweets. Cassia catches you watching and smirks. Breakfast of the gods? Maybe. Second breakfast. You mutter. Feasting in Rome is a paradox. You live in a world where most people survive on porridge, stale bread, and beans. But occasionally, and not just for emperors, the curtain lifts. Rich or poor, someone always finds a way to host a blowout, whether it's a noble's birthday or a baker winning a legal dispute. There's a celebration logic that reads, if you're going to be miserable tomorrow, you might as well overeat today. You're invited to a modest banquet held by a former soldier who struck lucky with a land grant. He's bought 3 chickens, 3 dozen eggs, and enough olive oil to coat an entire wrestling team. You help peel onions while others crush pine nuts and soak dates. One woman is stuffing grape leaves with a mixture of herbs, cheese, and fish sauce. It sounds vile. It smells divine. Lunch starts with the eggs boiled, then cracked open and marinated in vinegar and lovage. Then comes lentil mash, meatballs flavored with cumin and honey, and a big dish of baked barley with melted cheese. It's heavy, comforting, and exactly the kind of food that invites naps you'll regret. Then comes the centerpiece, the pig, carved dramatically, each slice steaming, juices running, skin crackling under the knife. You get 2 slices on lean, 1 fatty, a serving of prunes, stewed in spiced wine. The combination makes you blink. Sweet, salty, savory, sticky. For a moment, the entire table goes silent. Someone tells a story about Emperor Vitellius, who once hosted a banquet with 0 fish and 7 birds, many of them exotic and barely edible. He was trying to impress senators, someone says, or ruin them. Hard to tell. Historians still argue whether the entire feast was real or propaganda. But either way, it's the stuff of legend. There's a game now. A man holds up 2 bowls sewn, filled with peeled grapes. One with stuffed dates, and dares you to guess which is which, while blindfolded. You win the first round. Then, lose the second. As punishment, you're made to recite bad poetry while chewing dried figs. The figs make it worse. Later, when the food's mostly gone and the sun's crawling toward the horizon, the drinking begins in earnest. Mulled wine steeped with cloves, saffron, and just enough vinegar to curl your tongue. Cassia raises a cup and toasts to the gods. Then to the cooks. Then to your shared misery, tomorrow morning. Everyone laughs, but they know she's right. Feasts like this weren't just common in Roman life, they were expected. Even those who couldn't afford them outright saved scraps and coins for weeks just to host one decent day of abundance. There's a certain Roman pride in showing that, for one afternoon, you could eat like the elite, even if you're boiling turnips the rest of the week. Before sunset, an old man sings a song about a goose that escaped sacrifice and ended up in a senator's stew by accident. He claims it's true, though everyone knows he says that about every song. You throw him a scrap of barley cake anyway. His voice, at least, has earned it. By twilight, you're lying on a blanket, staring at a sky that refuses to decide between dusk and storm. Your stomach is a battlefield. You're full, not comfortably full. But this was a mistake. Full. There's a reason Roman vomitoriums existed. Though contrary to popular belief, they weren't built for purging meals, they were just exits in amphitheaters. Still, the term fits how you feel. Cassia leans beside you. One arm flopped over her face. I can't move. Same. If I d? Tell my aunt. I never liked her soup. You promise. On your way home, you pass another group, just beginning their feast music playing. Wine sloshing. Someone already singing off-key. You nod. Rome, even in its most brutal moments, never misses a chance to feast like tomorrow won't come. Back in your room, you collapse on your mat and stare at the ceiling, belly rising and falling like dough left to rise. Your ears still ring with laughter. Your mouth tastes of fennel and smoke, and your fingers are sticky with some forgotten sauce. Sleep comes slowly, but warmly. You're full. You wake to a thudding behind your temples and a dry, papery taste in your mouth, like you licked the bottom of an amphora. The sky outside your window is a pale, pitiless gray, and your stomach is protesting, like a senator caught skipping temple duty. The feast was good, almost too good. Now comes the price. You roll to your feet, swaying slightly, and wonder if you might be the first person in Rome to perish from too much lentil mash. The floor feels like it's made of warm clay. You need water, and maybe divine intervention. In the alley outside, there's a collective groan humming through the air. Everyone's moving slower. Bread vendors yawn without shame. Chickens seem to walk more carefully, as if they're hung over too. Cassia appears with her tunic twisted backwards and eyes like someone lost a dice game in her brain. Never again, she mumbles, which is a lie. You both know it. Rome is a city of indulgence, but also of consequence. Every great feast is followed by a reckoning, and the Romans, despite all their temples and laws, and toga chandle it the same way you do, regret, broth, and avoidance. You stop by the public fountain and sip water so cold it feels like redemption. Then, you start looking for something restorative, something designed to take the sting out of excess. Fortunately, the Romans were experts in post-feast survival. First up, posca, assur, watered-down vinegar drink, carried by soldiers and poor citizens alike. It tastes like punishment, but it rehydrates and settles the stomach. You sip it slowly, and your organs begin to reintroduce themselves. Then, a walk. Not a purposeful one, just aimless, drifting through narrow lanes. Letting time work its magic, you pass a vendor selling cumin-flavored bread and gag a little. No thank you. But across from him, someone's boiling chamomile and celery in a small clay pot. That smells like hope. You pay 2 coins for a ladleful. And it's everything your body needs shot. Bland, gently bitter, good for clearing humors. The vendor says, or guilt. You don't ask which humor you offended, but you suspect it was all of them. A boy near the basilica sells grated carrot soaked in vinegar. Heals the stomach lining. He tells passers-by, takes the sting off a roast goat hangover. That's oddly specific. You take a bite. It crunches like regret but goes down clean. You meet Flavius near the Forum, where he's sipping a tea that smells like boiled wood and dried dreams. Overdid it? Didn't you? He says without looking. You've got the face of a man who tried to eat the moon. Oh. You nod. He lectures for a while on moderation, balance, self-control. You note again. Swallowing the bitterness, not just of celery broth, but of your own failure. You young ones think every feast is a conquest. It's not. He sips. It's a trap. Oh. You ask him what the best cure is. He leans in and says, Lettuse. You blink. Lettuse? Lettuce. Raw. If you're brave, boiled. If you're wise, it cools the blood and quiets the stomach. You spend the next hour trying to find a merchant who hasn't run out. Turns out, you're not the only one on a lettuce quest. Finally, a girl selling near the Shrine of Fortuna offers you a few sad, wilted leaves for far too many coins. You eat them like they're sacred. And you know what? They help. Throughout the day, you collect more remedies from around the city. A clove of garlic, wrapped in cloth, to be placed under the tongue. Dried mint rubbed into the temples. A bath in tepid water, followed by a nap in the shade. Romans had cures for everything, even self-inflicted misery. Historians still argue whether these hangover cures worked, or whether the Romans simply convinced themselves they did. But when you spend hours chewing your way back to normalcy, you start to believe that belief might be half the medicine. You end up under a tree, head resting against the bark, staring at the dust swirling in the air. A dog sleeps nearby, belly exposed, snoring gently. You envy his peace. Cassia shows up again, holding a small bundle. Found it, she says. Inside is a pastry the size of your fist ends. Dry, full of raisins and fennel seeds. A priest said it soaks up wine. You're skeptical, but you split it with her. It's chewy, like punishment disguised as a gift. But it does sit well in your stomach. And for the first time all day, you feel more human than clay pot. As the sun dips and Rome begins its usual grumble into evening, you realize something comforting. This cycle indulgence and recovery isn't failure. It's ritual. It's rhythm. Even the gods, surely, must understand that a person can't be balanced all the time. Some days, you overeat. Other days, you steep lettuce and pray. You walk home slowly, the ache in your belly finally replaced by a soft, blank, quiet. You drink water, rub a little mint oil on your wrists, and lie down. Tonight, you won't dream of roasted pig or honeyed wine. Hopefully, just a dark, cool silence and the slow, gentle thud of your stomach forgiving you. You wake, not with hunger, but with a need to understand. Your body, finally recovered from days of indulgence, fasting, stewed vegetables, and medicinal honey, feels like it's no longer under siege. And in that rare quiet of the early Roman morning before the baker's boy starts shouting, and before the neighbor's goat begins its one-goat opera, you start wondering, why is it all so strange? Why does food in Rome come with so many rules, rituals, restrictions, and deeply inconvenient vegetable broths? You tie your sandals and step into the street. The air is cool and dusty, and you walk past a woman sprinkling salt in her doorway, muttering to herself, not a prayer. Exactly, but close. Salt. You've heard. Wards off bad energy, or worms, or jealousy. It depends on who you ask. You pass a man chewing garlic before sunrisenot for taste, but for spiritual protection. His breath could repel armies. But he looks proud. You catch Flavius hunched under his olive tree, sipping hot water with dried rue leaves floating on top. You wince. Still believing in balance, you ask? He shrugs. It's not about belief. It's about respect. The body wants what the gods permit. Oh, that's a very Roman answer. You sit beside him, and he explains the logicor, rather, the mythos behind the madness. Romans don't diet the way modern minds understand dieting. They don't count calories or carbs. They aren't obsessed with muscle definition or waistlines. Instead, they view food as a spiritual equation. Every bite must balance the body's four humors: blood, flake, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much of one, and you're out of harmony. Too much heat? Eat cooling foods like cucumbers and lettuce. Feeling melancholic? Sweeten your blood with honey or dates. The system is elaborate, philosophical, deeply flawed. Historians still argue whether humoral theory had any measurable medical benefits, or whether it simply gave generations of Romans an excuse to moralize each other's grocery lists. Either way, it stuck. Cassia joins you, carrying a bowl of barley mash. This is for clarity, she announces, as if clarity tastes like boiled gravel. She sits cross-legged and begins to eat with all the enthusiasm of someone reading tax law. My cousin refuses to eat mushrooms now, she adds. Says they invite dreams of drowning. Oh. You raise an eyebrow. That's new. And he heard it from a priestess near Ostia. Supposedly, they carry water spirits. If you eat them before a storm, you'll dream of shipwrecks. You stifle a laugh. And if it's dry, then you'll just get gas. How? There's a kind of magic in the absurdity. Every ingredient is linked to myth, omen, or planetary influence. Chickpeas increase heat and courage. Lentils calm the spleen. Leeks purify the breath. Figs promote fertility, but only if they're eaten while standing. And only on odd-numbered days. You wander through the marketplace, eavesdropping on debates that have nothing to do with flavor. A vendor swears that eating radishes during an eclipse will make your teeth fall out. Another claims that milk curdled under a full moon cures envy. A third refuses to sell asparagus on days when Saturn is ascendant in the sky. Whatever that means, it's not superstition. They say, it's tradition. And somehow, in Rome, tradition always wins. You stop by a small apothecary run by a woman named Vedia. She's ancient and wiry. With a voice like gravel and a table full of roots and leaves, you ask her if Romans have always eaten like this. She grins, missing 3 teeth. Always? No. But long enough. Before we had books. We had recipes. And before we had medicine, we had soup. And she hands you a small scroll with diagrams of food pairings. Apples with vinegar. Bread with coriander. Fish with mint. It looks more like astrology than nutrition. Eat wrong, she says. And your body weeps. Eat right. And your dreams come true. You thank her and back away slowly before she curses your spleen. By midday, the heat settles in like a lazy god. And you sit in the shade, eating boiled cabbage wrapped in fig leaves. Not because you like it, because someone told you cabbage clears the mind and wards off evil thoughts. You're not sure if it's working. But your digestion is definitely busy. Cassia returns, waving a scroll she found in her uncle's collection. Look at this, she says. A list of dream food pairings from a temple scribe. You read aloud. Onions provoke visions of betrayal. Garlic leads to heroic dreams. Fish brings omens. Plums invite ancestral visitations. You pose. What about turnips? She grins. Nightmares. Always nightmares. That night, after a dinner of spelt flatbread and mint tea because Mars is in retrograde and dairy is discouraged, you lie in bed and reflect on the absurdity of it all. And the beauty. Roman food isn't just sustenance. It's identity. It's community. It's theater. Every fast is a ritual. Every indulgence, a transgression. Every herb has a tale. Every fruit, a fate. The diet isn't meant to make you slim or strong. It's meant to make you Roman. And somehow, despite the chaos, the restrictions, the wildly conflicting rules from one block to the next, it works. It binds you to your neighbors, your ancestors, your gods. It makes breakfast a prayer and lunch a decision. As you drift off, you wonder what tomorrow will bring. Dried leeks soaked in vinegar? A barley cleanse? Maybe a prophecy in a pear? You sigh. Better not skip breakfast. You wake to soft sunlight filtering through your shutters and the smell of something familiar barley again. Of course it's barley. After all the honeyed indulgences, vinegar stews, sacred lettuce, and fasting headaches, the world always returns to barley. It's not glamorous. It doesn't promise visions or purification. It just is. You sit up slowly, aware that this morning feels like a quiet farewell. Not to Rome. Not to life. But to the strange odyssey of its diet, from the sacred offerings to the accidental overindulgences. You've chewed your way through myth, medicine, punishment, and joy. And now, with only a crust of grain in hand and the sun rising over terracotta rooftops, you feel strangely grateful for it all. Outside, the city hums with casual energy. Chickens complain. Vendors roll open their stalls. A cartwheel squeaks as it bumps over the same broken stone it always does. Life is predictable here until it's not. But the food? That's always worth watching. You pass a man spooning lentil mush into his mouth while praying under his breath. Next to him, a woman roasts leeks while singing to Fortuna. hoping to earn favor for her son's upcoming court case. And down the block, 3 teenagers are daring each other to eat raw garlic and whisper curses at a shrine, because why not blend nutrition and mischief? Cassia greets you with a small bundle of herbs in her hand. "One last experiment?" she offers. You nod. She's gathered rue, mint, coriander, and a splash of vinegar. We'll call it balanced tea, she says, pretending she's not copying the apothecary's formula. It tastes like regret and ambition boiled together. You both grimace but finish your cups. As you walk, she muses. You know, none of this actually worked. Right? You tilt your head. Define worked. She thinks for a moment, then shrugs. Maybe that's the wrong word. Huh. And that's the thing. Roman dieting wasn't brutal because of hunger. It was brutal because it meant something. Every bite was pressure. Every missed bite was pressure too. It was a delicate dance with the divine, with social expectations, with superstition layered over tradition like honey over bread. Some scholars argue the obsession with food was a response to the uncertainties of Roman life disease. War, political instability. Others say it was just cultural inertia. A kind of edible religion passed down from kitchen to kitchen. And others believe it was all performative. Public displays of piety, wrapped in lettuce leaves and stuffed grape skins. You and Cassia stop by a bakery and buy one last sacred little cakelibum. Still warm. Its scent almost holy. She breaks it in half and passes you a piece. For the household gods, she says with a wink. You eat it slowly, letting the honey cling to your teeth like memory. You pass the forum, where an orator is ranting about the decline of morals and how the younger generation eats too many figs without proper reflection. A woman next to him fans herself and mutters, "He's just hungry." Oh. You catch sight of a small boy feeding bits of apple to a pigeon. He laughs every time it pecks gently at his palm. That's as close to joy as food gets uncomplicated. Generous. Shared. And for the first time, it really lands. The Roman diet wasn't about restriction or abundance. It was about interpretation. Everyone made the rules fit their fear or their hope. Every cure was part faith, part vegetable. Every indulgence came with a whispered apology to some forgotten spirit. Every fast had a loophole, and every Roman priest, beggar, senator, fishmonger ate with the weight of the whole empire on their plate. You think back on the crocodile dung sunscreen, the dormice stuffed with herbs, the vinegar drinks and wormwood decoctions, and the belief that lettuce could chill the blood or figs could shape your dreams. You remember the bad poetry read through dried dates, the priests who skipped garlic on Jupiter's feast day, and the children who measured their treats by moonlight. And through it all, somehow, Rome survived. Not because of the food, but in spite of it, or maybe because people believed it all mattered. The ritual, the restriction, the relenting, it gave them something to do, something to control, something to believe in. And now, as the breeze picks up and the marketplace fills with the familiar rustle of grain sacks and gossip, you realize you're not hungry, not because you're full, but because, finally, you're at peace with the way things taste. So now, lying back, belly soft and breath slow, you let it all fade: the garlic cures, the fig rituals, the sacred lettuce, the honey-stuffed pigs. Let the images unravel like vines drying in the sun, their scent still clinging faintly to your fingers. You did it. You wandered the dusty alleys of ancient Rome, chewing through chaos and ceremony, superstition and sweetness. You survived the vinegar teas, the salt-crusted rules, the barley gruel that stuck in your teeth like bad omens. Let the distant noise of the Roman street dull into a kind hum, the kind that comes after a long meal, when the plates are cleared and people speak softly, full of thoughts they're too tired to share. You lie down on a simple mat in a simple room, the stone walls radiating the last heat of day. Somewhere, a dog yawns, a child giggles over a stolen plum, a woman stirs a pot of lentils that will feed 5 mouths tonight, maybe 6 if the neighbor visits. There is no feast waiting now, no fast either, no omen, no ritual, no priest wagging a finger over your shoulder. Just rest, just breath, just the taste of old stories and stranger truths, and maybe, just maybe, as your eyes begin to close, the dream that comes will be soft seasoned with honey and a little rosemary. Because here, in this moment, you're full enough? Sleep well, traveler.